And that item is the shelter capacity update and ordinance amending Chapter 6.36 camping of the City of Santa Cruz Municipal Code. I'll just go ahead and remind those that are in the audience that are wanting to engage on this item. How this will flow is that we'll have a presentation from our city staff. We'll then have an opportunity for members of the council to ask questions. We'll go ahead and open it up at that time for public comment. I will allow anybody who's interested in speaking to the council briefly the opportunity to do so in 1 minute. Then I'll acknowledge those who reached out in advance to have the group comments on behalf of your group to come forward, and then we'll open it up to the 2 minutes for public comment, at which point we'll go ahead and return back to the council for action and deliberation. I'll go ahead and remind those that are in the audience that it is my job to ensure that we have an opportunity for everybody to engage in this in a way that's going to not be intimidating or threatening, and that is going to adhere to our rules of decorum. And if there is notice of not adhering to those rules of decorum, I will go ahead and give you a warning. If it continues, I will ask you to leave, especially if it's interrupting our ability to conduct the city's business, the people's business. So at that point, we'll go ahead and turn it over to our presenters.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I was going to start by giving an update on the shelter capacity, and then I'll turn it over to City Attorney and the Police Chief, who will present on the ordinance amendments. So I've got some slides to go over. First, to just give you some background relative to shelter, and what I'm referring to is the emergency shelter that is available for people who are, on the street and that is immediately available. There are other types of shelter available in the county that sometimes is called emergency shelter, but I'm not referring to that, like the recuperative care beds, the River Street shelter. There's some others like that which I can provide information on, but I'm really focusing on that truly emergency shelter capacity. So historically, we've had, on a year-round basis, about 40 beds at the Poly Loft. And then in the wintertime, we would add about 100 beds. For many years, it was up at the Armory. And this is during the winter, typically between November and either March or April. Sometimes it was extended if the rainy season went longer. And then in subsequent years, at a combination of the Salvation Army and the VFW. So that's been basically the historic model. Then in recent years, we added the River Street Camp, which added 60 year-round beds and can accommodate about 80 individuals. So the current model is about 155. So moving on to the changes that have been made in recent years, and particularly in the past year. And with that, we now have a model of 155 year-round beds. So we went from looking at trying to create a more of a year-round model as opposed to what we used to have before. And that now includes an additional 115 year-round beds over the historic number. And those are largely comprised of the River Street Camp and the Salvation Army 55 beds. Poly Loft, again, continues to be available. Countywide, when you look at all the various shelter beds that are available, including in Watsonville, between Salvation Army, Sienna House, Housing Matters, Monarch Services, New Life Community Services, and there's about 554, which is a larger number than last winter when we had 417. In addition, there's about 75 new safe parking spaces. So there has been some improvement in recent years, certainly with respect to the availability of shelter, and that is very much needed and appreciated. A lot of this has been able to occur as a result of additional funding from the state as well, and has been coordinated through the work of the HAP, which has allocated money for this purpose, as well as for a variety of other shelter as well as homeless prevention programs. Nonetheless, we recognize that there is still an additional need for shelter beds, that it is not adequate for the level of unsheltered individuals that we have in our community. And Santa Cruz has about 50% of all the homeless population in the county. So it's a particularly significant impact on our city. Accordingly, as you know, providing shelter is really critical for a variety of reasons, including our ability to assist individuals, to just provide adequate human care and services for individuals, as well as to be able to address and deal with nuisance and complaints that occur in our community. And as a result, the council at your last meeting directed that we come back with a couple of items, and the two are up here. First, that we bring back a revision to the camping ordinance that would comply with the Martin versus Boise case, and that'll be presented in a few minutes. And then, secondly, that a request be made to the County of Santa Cruz to assist with an increase in shelter bed capacity as quickly as possible, recognizing that winter is upon us. As a result, we have had conversations with the Santa Cruz County staff over at the CAO's office, and we've already been meeting regularly with them to look at a variety of issues that we have to deal with, including what we've put in place up to now, but had additional conversations about the ability to add additional shelter. They were certainly open to that. They understood the need, and were willing to discuss a variety of options that are available to us. In addition, we sought out the Board of Supervisors assistance in this regard, and they too have expressed an interest in assisting the city with expanding winter shelter capacity in particular. And there's a letter in your packet from the two board members expressing that support. So with respect to needs, as I noted earlier, we really have a need for winter shelter, and there's a couple of reasons why it's critical. One is that compared to historic numbers, our shelter vacancy rates are, while they're not at 100% every single night, and they do vary, they are at higher levels than they have been historically. And the other thing that has sort of occurred, and we've found as a result of the recent shift, is that with respect to the way we provide the various services to the various populations, homeless population, also can be a challenge. So, for example, one of the advantages of having the VFW and the Laurel Street Shelter, Salvation Army Shelter, was that it allows us to separate families and women and children versus the general population, and provide just various types of facilities for the various populations. And with the loss of the VFW, it's much harder to do that. So there is a need as well to do that, to provide that kind of shelter support. Obviously, the River Street Camp has also been an addition that has been helpful in terms of providing stability. That provides 24-hour shelter services, which is an addition that we haven't had in many years. And so there is, as I noted, a need for additional shelter capacity, and we need to continue to work on that. And staff certainly is ready to, and has discussed a variety of options that we think are available that we can work with the county to implement fairly quickly. The other need that we have is we also need a availability of what we call on-call beds, and that is a number of beds that are available on an as-needed basis, particularly as situations arise, particularly in the evenings, so that if there is an issue, somebody needs emergency shelter, or there is a complaint and police is called out, and they can assist somebody with, first of all, they need to be able to contact the shelter and find out what the capacity is, but then also just have some availability of beds so they can help individuals really as needed on an on-time basis or real-time basis, which is something we don't have a system like that. So that is, we believe, is a great need, and again, would want to work with the county to create those. And then finally, the other thing that we've discussed earlier this afternoon that we recognize is a critical need is that we need to relocate River Street Camp as a result of the water project that'll start there in March. And again, there too, we do have options that we've identified relative to relocating that. We are confident that that can happen, but we also need the assistance of the county to work directly on doing that, because again, there's opportunities there to do that in such a way that perhaps we could even increase capacity of our shelters. So those are really the critical needs and issues that we're focusing now, and I'd be happy to answer any questions with respect to shelter capacity, and if not, I'll turn it over to City Attorney and the Police Chief. Thank you.
Do any of the council members have questions about the shelter capacity, or do you want to reserve questions until the end of this time? Okay. Do you have a question, or would you like to reserve your question?
Oh, I mean, I have questions about it, so thank you. So it's wonderful to hear about the county's intention on more winter shelter, which is always good. Thanks for the short presentation on that. Just curious, knowing the historic winter shelter that we've had and lost because of the VFW and other situations, why are we only addressing this issue now as opposed to, say, 2.5 or 3 months ago, knowing that we were going to be getting $10 million from the state? Because you have to excuse me, 137 bed increase and $7 million from the state, because $3 million is allocated to other stuff. Why so long? And now it's raining.
Well, I want to point out that the level of shelter capacity that we have now is significantly more than what we've had in the past. Again, I recognize that it's not adequate, but certainly it is significantly more than we had, because we went from a model where we only had 40 year-round and only 100 in the winter to a model where we have 160 or so year-round. So that's that alone adds significant cost to be able to provide those services, because you have again year-round as opposed to just part of the year. In addition, the River Street Camp model is also more costly. It's a 24-hour services. It also provides for connection to services. So a combination of adding more capacity on a year-round basis increase the cost to do that. So that's one big portion. Also, with respect to the funding that came from the state, there's a variety of uses for that. Part of it was allocated to the acquisition of property where we want to create a permanent navigation and shelter center, and that's a Seabrook property. So part of it went to that, and part of it also went to other shelter programs like the Safe Parking Program, as well as other homelessness prevention programs. So it was allocated amongst a variety of different uses, and there was an improvement with respect to emergency shelter capacity. However, I think we all recognize that it's not sufficient, and there's an interest in doing that. And also, we didn't anticipate particularly, like, for example, the issue that we're having with the populations, the conflicts with the women and children as we're having now.
Thanks.
And the use has actually gotten higher than in past years.
Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is kind of a logistical question related to recording of this discussion. We received a communication about making sure that this information from your oral report was included, and the request was to have it in our minutes, but I'm just wondering if we can address that and get this PowerPoint so that that information is available to people who
Yes, I'll actually
afterwards who don't necessarily can't be here tonight and don't want to sit through watching
Absolutely, and
the
our practice is actually to attach all of our presentations to our in the minutes. Yes, so they'll be included. Yes.
And then my other question is, it's great to hear about the work that's happening to try to bring additional shelter space online. And I'm just wondering if you have any, if you anticipate, like when you anticipate getting back to us, if there are decisions we're going to be asked to make. When will we know? Because it started to rain today, which and got very cold. So it reminded me, certainly, and probably many others, that this is urgent.
Our hope is that we can have something for you by your next meeting or sooner. Again, our conversations are ongoing, and we have some viable options that we're exploring. Again, we want to, in the interest of just trying to be able to do our due diligence and to move forward on some options, we want to kind of keep them, not make them public at this point, again, so that we can do that due diligence, but then come back to you. But it will require council direction, also board support. They've expressed it, but I think we can move fairly quickly.
Councilmember Cruz.
Just one question. I know we've asked about this in the past, but is it possible, and I see some statistics in our report, but is it hard just to, like, every day or maybe every week, just get a breakdown of how many folks have stayed at the Salvation Army, River Street camp, and the Laurel Street? VFW. Is that possible to do? Like every week, we just get that count, and then maybe a fourth category, like people that we couldn't house that needed shelter.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know we've made a request because that was a council request. I think we've made a request over at the county to see if they can provide us with more up-to-date shelter numbers. I don't think Ralph is here. I think he's the one that's been working on it. I don't know if you have an update, Ralph, on that. But we're certainly obviously willing to provide you with as many updates as we can.
Thank you.
Here's Ralph.
Ralph Demarcate with the City Manager's Office. We have reached out to the county for regular updates. We also do get daily updates from the shelters, and we could share that with you. And we do use them in our programming efforts. So for each of the 2 shelters right now, the daily average vacancy is about a handful, and it changes from about 8 to 4. And some nights it is at full capacity, but that changes on a nightly basis. And we'll be sure to get those updates to you on a more regular basis.
And something that frequently comes up is somebody is illegally camping or camping in a place that it's not a good place. Instead of getting ticketed, maybe it's 2:00 in the morning. Is it possible for a police officer to take that person to one of those 3 shelters, knowing that there's a bed space available?
I will leave that to our chief of police maybe answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wake up, Andy.
All right. All right, we'll go ahead and ask that you maybe not provide comment from the chamber comments. We'll go ahead and ask our chief of police if he wants to respond. I do know that's partially the recommendation that's before us this evening in regards to holding some spaces for officers to have available if need be. But if you want to speak to it, you're welcome.
Certainly, there's always that possibility that we could transport somebody to a shelter, given a variety of circumstances that may factor into that. But yes, we can do that.
Will they take them at 2:00 in the morning? Because I've heard people say no, it just won't happen. Doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think that's part of the request that we have, that we currently don't have a good system where the police can, in real time, check as far as shelter capacity and then transport individuals. That's the piece that we need to really work on. That's an immediate need. I think certainly police has the information on where shelters are available, and they provide that to individuals as they confront them. But we don't have a system where we can, in real time, find out what the capacity is and then make arrangements for individuals to then be transported there or directed there as appropriate.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and then shift over to the remainder of your presentation if you like at this time. Mr. Kondati.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Watkins, members of the City Council. We have a PowerPoint as well, so I'll wait for that to load.
Right, escape. What is it, Tony? Camping ordinance, right?
So we call it karma.
So I'm going to talk about the draft ordinance that's on your agenda for consideration this evening, an amendment to Chapter 636 of the Municipal Code pursuant to the Council's direction. I'll start by talking a little bit about how we got to where we are. In September of last year, the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals decided the case of Martin versus the City of Boise, a challenge to the City of Boise's ordinance prohibiting camping out of doors on public or private property. At that time, we analyzed the Martin decision and our municipal code in light of the Martin decision, and the police department, in consultation with my office, suspended enforcement of Chapter 636 because we recognized right away that what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held was the problematic aspects of Boise's ordinance. We had the same issues that we had to grapple with. So that decision, in some respects, gave rise to the Ross encampment that the council dealt with earlier this year. And in April, the City Council did a couple of things. First, it directed the city staff to close down the Ross encampment. It also adopted a set of standard operating procedures that were based on the Martin case and other federal district court cases that have interpreted it since it was initially issued to address some of the due process, notice, and property rights questions that are raised when an encampment of that sort is dismantled. So the council adopted standard operating procedures that were utilized in the closure of the Gateway encampment or the Ross camp. And it also directed or adopted as formal city council policy the chief of police's practice of suspending enforcement of Chapter 636 pending an amendment of the municipal code to bring it into conformity with the Martin case. At the last meeting, the city council then directed my office to work with the police department and the city manager's office on bringing forward an amendment to the camping ordinance that conforms to the requirements or to the decision of Martin versus Boise. So that is what is before you tonight. I just want to emphasize that this is not intended to, well, what this is intended to do is narrowly respond to the specific direction of the City Council. This is a proposed approach that we believe is consistent with the Martin case, but the City Council can make modifications to the ordinance that we propose. This is our suggested approach. So the holding of Martin, in essence, is that so long as there is a greater number of homeless individuals in a jurisdiction than the number of available beds and shelters, the jurisdiction cannot prosecute homeless individuals for involuntarily sitting, lying, and sleeping in public. That is, as long as there is no option of sleeping indoors, the government cannot criminalize indigent homeless people for sleeping outdoors on the property, on public property, on the false premise that they had a choice in the matter. So that seems like a sweeping ruling by the Ninth Circuit, but the court also immediately thereafter narrowed that somewhat general statement. And I cannot read that. It states, naturally, our holding does not cover individuals who have
Do have access. Have access to adequate. Oh, do you want me to read it?
I can pull it up on my laptop where it's very legible.
Access to adequate.
I just want to read it because I don't think members of the public are probably going to be able to read that either. Naturally, our holding does not cover individuals who do have access to adequate temporary shelter, whether because they have the means to pay for it or because it is realistically available to them for free, but who choose not to avail themselves of it or choose not to use it. Or it goes on, nor do we suggest that a jurisdiction with insufficient shelter can never criminalize the act of sleeping outside. Even where shelter is unavailable, an ordinance prohibiting sitting, lying, or sleeping outside at particular times or in particular locations might well be constitutionally permissible. The reason why the court didn't address that issue head on, but just made a general statement like that is that that was not the issue before it. And so, but we took guidance from the language of Martin, specifically the general holding, as well as these narrowing statements, and incorporated that into the ordinance that's before you tonight. So now I'm going to go over the proposed amendments, and the format here is to provide you with the current camping ordinance language, and this is just a general summary of the ordinance language that's in your packet, and a comparison to what is proposed. So the current ordinance, section 636.010, prohibits in the city on public or private property sleeping between the hours of 11 p.m. to 8:30 a.m., setting up bedding between the hours of 11 p.m. to 8:30 a.m., and setting up a campsite anytime, and those terms are all defined in the code. New section 636.020, well, let me take a step back. What we've proposed in the new ordinance is to distinguish between camping that occurs during daytime hours and encampments that are set up during the nighttime. The sound just changed. New section 636.020, daytime camping prohibits establishing or maintaining encampments between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. And requires a warning and a reasonable opportunity to remove belongings before a citation is issued. I will add that I've distributed, and there are additional copies that are available to members of the public to review, of a new revised version of section 636.020 that takes into account some correspondence that the city councils received since the posting of the agenda, and I'll go over that when we get to it. New section 636.030 prohibits sleeping or setting up an encampment between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. So how does that take into account the language of the Martin versus Boise decision? Well, the current ordinance, which was amended most recently, I think in 2006, by the addition of section 636.055, states that if a citation is issued when the winter shelter at the National Guard Armory is full, then there's an exemption for violation if a person is on a current waiting list for shelter at the Homeless Services Center or River Street Shelter, and requires my office to dismiss citations issued in the above in those circumstances. And the way we implemented that direction was to check in with the Homeless Services Center when we received citations for violations of the camping ordinance. And if a person's name appeared on that list, then we just no-filed those citations, or if we discovered after the citations were filed, we asked the court to dismiss them. The new proposed ordinance with respect to nighttime camping incorporates the language of Martin versus Boise and states that it will not be enforced against persons experiencing homelessness if there are a greater number of homeless individuals in the city than available shelter beds, and at the time a citation is issued, the person has no actual and immediate access to shelter. So what this sets up is a process whereby if a person who is camping in violation of the nighttime encampment restriction is contacted by a police officer before a citation can be issued, the police officer would have to check with available shelter facilities, determine if they have space available, refer that person to the available shelter, and offer them the opportunity to avail themselves of it and to go to the shelter before a citation can be issued. Current ordinance also has several circumstances in which camping is permitted, specifically camping areas that are designated for camping, camping events authorized by the Parks and Recreation Director pursuant to a different section of the code, camping events authorized by the City Council per the same section with respect to the Parks and Rec Director, or camping in the rear yard or enclosed side yard of a residence with the consent of the owner or occupant, camping in a church parking lot in a licensed and registered vehicle, but the code limits that provision to 3 vehicles in a given parking lot, or parking lot of a private business with the permission of the owner and tenants, and that provision restricts the number of vehicles to 2. Also, it permits camping in a residential off-street driveway, but is limited to 1 vehicle and 3 days per calendar month. The proposed ordinance largely mirrors section 636.020. This is section 636.040, but it also authorizes the City Council to allow camping events in specific locations by resolution. I would also just point out that the council received a request from the Association of Faith Communities, which manages the parking lot a shelter program on church parking lots, and they have requested that the council consider increasing the limit on vehicles parking in church parking lots from 3 to 5. The current ordinance permits camping in city parks with a permit from the Parks and Rec director, and it attaches several conditions to that, such as the provision of sanitary facilities, liability insurance, refuse collection, that sort of thing. But it limits camping events for more than 3 nights in any calendar year, except in conjunction with some habitat or park restoration project. New section 636050 also largely mirrors the current language, but allows the city council to authorize camping events that are not limited to 3 days in any calendar year. That's an error in my PowerPoint up there. Current ordinance provides that a violation, initial violation is cited as an infraction, and the ordinance specifies a $20 fine or 8 hours of community service. Proposed ordinance largely mirrors the current language, but reduces the community service hours to 3. The current ordinance also makes declares a misdemeanor a person who is cited for a first offense and then is subsequently cited within 24 hours. But it's not applicable to the sleeping portion of the ordinance, only to the setting up an encampment language. Proposed section 636070 declares a misdemeanor a subsequent violation within 48 hours, so it extends the time period within which a misdemeanor citation can be issued, but it is not applicable to a violation of the overnight camping restrictions. So that would continue to be citable as an infraction. I mentioned at the outset the standard operating procedures, which are intended to provide due process to individuals who are contacted by the city and who are required to dismantle or remove an encampment that's made illegal under the ordinance. The current language authorizes city officials to remove any encampment found an immediate threat to health and safety forthwith. And for occupied encampments, also requires a warning and an opportunity to remove the campsite forthwith. And that forthwith language is potentially problematic under principles of due process. The new language requires the development of standard operating procedures similar to those adopted by resolution of the council in April to ensure that due process is provided when an encampment is removed and personal property is taken into custody. And the reason why we're recommending the development of new standard operating procedures is that those that the council considered back in April were specifically drafted with the intent of addressing the gateway encampment situation, and we've found in the months since that they don't really work in all circumstances. So what we envision is working with staff and the police department to prepare a new set of standard operating procedures that looks at various different circumstances and may have different timelines for providing notice and that sort of thing that are more tailored to different types of circumstances that might be encountered out in the field. It authorizes the removal of attended and unattended encampments, but only after providing notice and an opportunity to remove the equipment and personal belongings. It requires posting of notice of removal and an opportunity to retrieve personal belongings that are not deemed health hazard, a contraband, or evidence of a crime or garbage. And for items that are not removed by the occupants of an encampment, it requires that the city store specified personal effects, essentially anything of value that isn't considered a biohazard or clearly is not something that's intended to be kept. And pursuant to existing state law, requires the storage for at least 90 days. So what would happen is the site would be posted before the encampment is removed. And it would again be posted after with notice indicating that the property has been taken into custody and instructions on how it can be retrieved. The recommendation is that the council consider the ordinance that's before you for introduction with further amendments to section 636020. That's a typographical error on the PowerPoint. Also consider the AFC request to increase church parking lot vehicle limit to 5. I was remiss. I did mention in the staff report, in the report, that there was a presentation made to the catch on earlier in the week, or last week, and at the time the catch, by consensus, asked to be provided with a draft of the SOPs before they're brought forward to the City Council to have an opportunity to comment and provide their input before they're adopted and implemented. Secondly, that the council receives input from the catch and the community on designated allowable sleeping areas for those unable to accept shelter available to personal circumstances. I didn't repeat that in the report because it didn't deal directly with the ordinance, but is really more geared towards the city manager's portion of the presentation. And that the council receive input from the catch and the community on more allowable car camping locations and provisions. I will further. So here are the amendments to section 636020. And these amendments are designed to address concerns that were raised about the breadth of the daytime encampment prohibition. So the new language states that camping between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. shall be prohibited if it reasonably appears, based on the totality of the circumstances, that a person intends to remain in the location overnight, and or the person has occupied the site since before 6:45 a.m. on the date when enforcement action is taken by the police department. The other addition is that it states that nothing in subdivision A shall be interpreted as prohibiting the use of cooking methods and cooking locations otherwise authorized by law where the conditions described in subdivisions A1 or A2 are not fulfilled, or the use of blankets, recreation equipment, or similar items for daytime use in parks, beaches, or on private property where the conditions described in subdivisions A1 or A2 are not fulfilled, or the use of daytime tents in the sand areas of the beach where conditions described are not fulfilled, or the act of sleeping in public places during the daytime when those conditions are not fulfilled. The conditions being evidence based on the circumstances of intent to remain overnight. So again, this is narrowly designed to address the issues raised by the court in the Martin versus Boise decision, other cases that have interpreted that decision, our own experience in litigation arising from the dismantling of the Ross camp, and discussions with city attorney colleagues all over California about how they're attempting to deal with the implications of the Martin versus Boise decision. I guess one last note is that there is a pending writ of certiorari before the United States Supreme Court by the city of Boise, asking that the Supreme Court take up the Martin case for consideration in this coming term of the Supreme Court. A decision on whether that will occur is expected sometime in December. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. So we'll go ahead and see if there's any questions from the council at this time, and then we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment. So now's the opportunity for the council to ask questions. Councilmember Glover.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Tony. So just with regards to, you mentioned the SOPs and redoing them and everything, when we made the direction on November 12th, I emphasized the importance of incorporating the conversation of the Phoenix camp that was forming behind the Ross Shopping Center. And, it was said, that's that'll be covered. But then 3 days later, the camp was then raided and closed by the police department. So I was just curious regarding Phoenix Camp, were all of the SOPs followed? So, for example, was there 72 hours given to the notice given to all of those that were there?
No. On further analysis subsequent to the city council meeting, we determined that the conduct that was going on at the location behind the Ross was a trespass that's a violation of state penal code. And we relied upon the direction that the council gave at the meeting in April, at which time it directed that the Ross encampment be closed and that upon the closure that it not be made available for members of the public to re-enter the site. So at the time that the encampment was reestablished or attempted to be reestablished, what happened was that the folks who organized that encampment broke the padlocks that the city had put on the gate and entered illegally. So we looked at it as akin to someone who entered into the city's corporate yard or the police department's closed off parking lot who are trespassing. So it's not the same as a camping issue that arises on property that's accessible to members of the public.
And so you're, just to clarify, so you're saying that we're not required to give any notice or any kind of awareness when we're moving in to remove a group of people that are on a site that maybe or may not be trespassing?
That's right. Different rules apply to someone who's trespassing than to someone who's simply camping on property that's accessible to members of the public. And
what are the, would we need to establish new SOPs associated with trespassing in order to make it so that we were required? Because maybe the next question will clear it up. Did Santa Cruz City Manager staff, Santa Cruz Police Department, Rangers, or members of the fire department instruct people to move over to the Phoenix camp subsequent or previous to the raiding and clearing?
I'm not sure. I don't quite understand the question.
Did any city staff or police department representatives instruct people to move from their current location over to the Phoenix camp before it was closed?
Yes. I'm not aware of that.
Maybe one of the other colleagues here might be able to answer.
I'm not aware of any instructions to do that.
So where do they move from to there? It'd be a question, but no, we did not tell anybody that they could go to the Phoenix camp.
Okay, it's just there were many people that on the day of the closure stated that they had been told to move from the post office over to the camp the night before it was closed. So this is concerning for me, especially if we're not required to give notice to be sending people from one place to another and then closing it based off of a kind of loophole in our SOPs that doesn't require us to give them notice. Anyway, that's my question. We don't need to get into the conversation yet. That's coming after public comment, which I look forward to. Can you confirm or deny the older woman identified as a Miss Bonnie Hill that was found dead on Cedar Street recently?
I don't have any information about that.
Police Chief?
I'm sure we investigated, but I'm not aware of the details.
City Manager?
I'm not familiar with the case. No.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised. It was covered by a news station citing 2 deaths recently of Ms. Quintero and now Ms. Hill. So that's interesting that no one knows anything about it.
I mean, I'm aware that it happened. I just don't have the details. I thought you wanted details. So.
Maybe if you could please keep your voices down or your comments to yourself. We're going to have an opportunity to hear from you. Many of you who have actually requested additional time as a group. So we'll have an opportunity for now the council to ask questions. I would appreciate it if you could please reserve your time, and we'll hear from you when public comment is available. So please continue with your.
Just want us all to take a second and listen to that rain that's hitting the window right now. So tents, let's talk about tents. So the restrictions make it so you can't have a tent up in the middle of the day. So what are people supposed to do in this kind of weather during the day? I'm just curious about what that logic or strategy is. Are they expected to hover under doorways or under a bridge, or what's our recommendation for folks like that if we pass these? amendments?
One of the reasons for the proposed revised language that was just distributed this evening was to address that concern that's been raised by members of the public in response to the draft, and so I think we've made an effort to address that circumstance.
And what is that? Can you just reiterate it for us?
Yes. Does not prohibit the use of blankets, recreational equipment, or similar items for day use in parks, beaches, or on private property where the conditions described in 1A or A2 are not fulfilled, or the use of daytime tents, sand areas of the beach where the conditions in A1 or A2 are not fulfilled, or the act of sleeping in public places where the conditions described in A1 or A2 are not fulfilled. So
maybe that's why I was a little confused, because it says tents on the beach, but then it says recreational equipment in parks. So do tents qualify as recreational equipment?
I would say so, but I think the council could clarify that further in the when you discuss the item.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. The other question I had to do with the misdemeanor aspect of it, and I realize that's already in the ordinance, but is it beneficial to add criminal records to people if they get a citation and then come back again the next day because they don't find another place to go? Or, I mean, what's
beneficial to the person who's arrested for a misdemeanor?
Or to us, or to the criminal justice system? I mean, we heard from the police chief about, or in a correspondence that he put out about the severe lack of attendance of people that attend. Also, that $20 fee that's associated with it is kind of misleading, because we talked about this with the bail schedule, where the $20 fee is just a city-associated fee, but the court fees can be levied as over $100. So it's just concerning to have that incorporated in here. I'm just wondering, wow, thank goodness for generators. The other question, was, did you see the message from the...
I will respond to that question.
Okay, yeah.
From my perspective, it's an enforcement tool that we have available that gives us the additional ability to deal with circumstances where we have repeat violations of the ordinance's requirements.
Thank you. And then, are you aware of...
Great tool, but it is an additional tool.
It is a tool, yes. Yes. Well, we can agree or disagree on the merits of that tool, but have you seen the letter from the ACLU?
Yes, I have.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're all aware that the ACLU, the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, and the Disability Rights of California have all come out in opposition to these ordinance changes, so we should take that into consideration as we move forward. Thank you.
Now, just add that the modifications to section 020 that are proposed.
Go ahead and have you made. We'll have you please. All right, we'll have an opportunity again to hear from you all.
I was just going to add that the modifications proposed this evening are also intended to address some of the issues raised by the ACLU and others' letter.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Vice Mayor Cummings, did you have a question?
I had one quick question. In the slide that was on exceptions, there was a portion that said police identify and offer shelter placement and an opportunity to relocate. With specificity around offer shelter placement, does that mean that the police would then help individuals get to those shelter areas? Or I just wanted to get this clarification.
This doesn't appear on the slide, but the ordinance itself states that the police department may but are not obligated to offer transportation. So there are circumstances, I'm sure, when it might be convenient or feasible to provide transportation, but the ordinance itself doesn't require it.
And I guess just a follow-up to that, currently the police are not allowed, or is it just, it's at their own discretion?
It's at their own discretion.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, you have a question?
Yeah, going back to the $20 fine, somebody said it was $198. Does that sound right?
We'll have a chance to hear from you. If Mr. McHenry, if I could please have you keep your comments down. We're going to go ahead. I've actually allowed you to have extra time on behalf of your organization. We'll have a chance to hear from you. Again, this is the time for the council to ask questions of our staff, and then we'll have public comment in regards to hearing from the public on this. We'll go ahead and have you answer the question at this time.
I don't have a specific figure, but that doesn't sound too out of line with the penalties and fees that are imposed by the courts.
So, and when you say 3 hours of community service, does that cover the whole 179, 198, whatever, or is it just the $20 that we levied in fine?
If the court allowed a person to perform, or if the person asked for community service in lieu of a fine, then that would cover the whole fine, not just the fees and penalties.
And going back to the notice of removal, is when you put the notice of removal, how many hours do people have to move their stuff out? Is it 72?
The current SOPs state 72 hours, but that's not really workable if there's an encampment set up on a sidewalk in front of a business. So we plan to bring that back to the council for consideration of a range of notice requirements depending on specific circumstances.
I don't know if you said or the city manager, you said conflicts with women and children population. I caught my ear. I was wondering what that was about.
Mostly what I was referring to there is that at the shelter we have currently with respect to the Laurel Street facility, the way the facilities are set up, it's really difficult to separate the family and women from the men population there. It'd be nice to have a facility that could be more focused on providing shelter for women and children, and others with special needs, which was the approach we had used previously. So there's a need for that, and I think having extra additional shelter capacity would allow for us to be able to do more of that, because occasionally there are situations where it's just not the best option to have the populations commingled, and it'd be helpful to be able to have some separation to address a variety of different issues. That was the intent of my comment.
Are they commingled now at the Laurel Street or no?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, my understanding is we do have another presentation. Is that correct? All right, Chief Mills, you're up. We'll go ahead and have you present as well.
Having trouble finding it. Presentation, you got it. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council members. This is an assessment of our assessment of the quality of life issues and the implementation of this policy and how it may affect behavior. As we considered this and working with the city attorney's office and the city manager, Tony Condotti was the what, and I believe this may be the why. We feel it's important. First of all, as we all know, this is a pretty compassionate community. But at the same time, there's a significant growing sense of frustration in many parts of the community. And we all see that on a regular basis via email and many other forms of communication. We are very mindful as a department that our approach must be balanced. Compassion with accountability, constitutionality with enforcement. If they get out of balance, then that's when we wind up having difficulty. I just want to throw a little bit of caution in here. This nor any other ordinance will solve our homeless problem. I think we need to state it up front and be pretty clear about that this ordinance may affect some of the behaviors of some of the recalcitrant ones. However, overall, it's not going to stop homelessness. We recognize that the cause of homelessness, drug addiction, mental health, and housing are not included. That because this is not in the swim lane of the city of Santa Cruz. And some of the homeless that I have talked to desire a nomadic lifestyle where they don't want our help and they don't want to live by the norms of our community. So therefore, these are the laws that may become necessary. A recent article in the Los Angeles Times mentioned that 95% of Los Angelinos said homelessness was their biggest problem. anything that rates more than traffic in LA has got to be a significant issue. Santa Cruz is not much different. We're at 93%, according to a recent survey, of either somewhat serious or very serious problem. Yet in Santa Cruz, interestingly enough, that the concern over crime actually reduced. So Santa Cruzans view this as a very significant and important issue, and we hear that on a regular basis. I do want to point out the tension and the frustration that I hear from staff as well as community members on a regular basis. Recently, 2 city workers were assaulted on Lot 27 in one day. Numerous complaints of intimidation by some of the homeless community, photos being taken of children, horns being honked in front of homes, refusing to leave property, encouragement to expropriate items from corporations. There's also been a few cases of vigilantism that we need to point out. 2 men were shot with BB guns in one night by juveniles. 2 homeless men were shot by juveniles with BB guns in one night. We are currently investigating those crimes. Encouragement of violence online from both sides of the equation. We see this regularly, and it's something that is not acceptable to me, to the men and women of the Santa Cruz Police Department, nor should be anybody in this community. Accountability is the issue at hand for us as a police department. I'm only talking about us as a police department. SCPD has, must, and will continue to help those who want and need help. That's part of our responsibility as human beings and as part of this community. Some people don't want the help, so the question becomes, how do we gain their compliance? And the compliance piece of that is we have not had anything that we can do with the enforcement side. That has been a source of frustration for the men and women of the police department. We understand accountability comes through the justice system, and we are only the gateway to that system. It's a start, it's not the end. Whether they get fined or found guilty, that's that's not our responsibility. Policing is, however, an important element, but I just want to be clear one more time. It's a misplaced focus if we're talking about solving homelessness. It's only to control the behaviors of those who are not following the norms of our society. Historical efforts to solve problems have been pretty robust here in Santa Cruz. You can see all the items listed on the left side, and on the right side, we've issued 11,000 citations in a pretty short period of time, with 8,700 of those going to people with no addresses. Most of those failed to appear in those citations. Those were mostly infractions that were sent to collections, which the logic of that escapes me. The impact on police services is substantial. A sample of calls for service during day watch, 36% of our calls related to homeless persons. That does not include reports where the suspect identity was not known. A recent review of crime statistics in the Santa Cruz found that those without an address were 14.5 times more likely to be victims and 12 times more likely to be the suspect in violent crime. These numbers do affect police availability, volumes of calls for service, our response times, and reduces our effectiveness because there just aren't solutions at this point that we can point to. Concerning camping, and narrowly on the camping topic, our tool belt is empty. We understand that we must rigorously protect the Constitution and operate within the law. There has not been an ordinance that we can enforce. We're bound by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, as the city attorney mentioned, but however, we can enact legislation to deal with some of these things in a thoughtful way. For the law to be effective, it has to be certain, swift, and fair. One of the things we're going to do is separate 2 officers to give full-time attention to deal with quality of life crimes, such as theft, drugs, and complaint-driven camping. It'll prohibit, this law also allows us to prohibit camping or sit up camp during the daytime, which is when we get most of our complaints. And then it also demands that we offer shelter to the homeless and allow for increased leverage for those who refuse, while at the same time protecting personal property. And we take that very serious as a department. And just to close, the ability of Santa Cruz to meet the challenge will not come from one singular law for the police to enforce, but from our collective efforts to collaborate with those who share a common vision, not of what Santa Cruz once was, but what we should be now. And we're prepared to do our part, and we'll answer certainly any questions that you might have.
Any questions for our chief here? Councilmember Glover.
Andy, you're great in a lot of ways. I really appreciate you. We've connected a few times and have some shared values, especially on trying to rejuvenate the concept of law enforcement and all that kind of stuff. So appreciate the presentation. Can I ask why you use the term the homeless or homeless as a, I mean, it just seems, language matters. And I noticed it in the slides. The people were referred to as homeless, 2 assaults by homeless on city staff, which is always, of course, never okay. So we want to keep our staff as safe as possible. But then when it was BB gunshots, it was 2 juveniles. So it just seems the language associated with the way that we're talking about people that are living unhoused is problematic. And it's something that I brought up previously with the term abatement for camps, because abatement's usually used for like rats and roaches and those kinds of nuisances. So as opposed to, say, closure of a camp or relocation of a camp or all that kind of stuff. So, I was just hoping, maybe, I guess the question is, can we be a little more sensitive in our intentional language maybe in the future? It's just a request.
Councilman Glover, of course, we can always be more sensitive.
Thank you. Oh, and then one more thing. Interesting term of terminology, the quality of life crimes, theft, drugs, and complaint-driven camping. Can you explain the rationale around that language, the quality of life crimes?
Well, certainly theft, drugs affect the quality of life for people in our community, and so does complaints where people are camping because of a variety of things: lack of sanitation, lack of disposable, places to dispose things, the disease that can come with it. It's not healthy for the person camping either, and we clearly understand that. I read your piece this morning about sleeping out. Thank you. And I can't imagine what it'd be like for that person. But at the same time, there has to be some level of quality of life for not only the people who are houseless, but also the people who are living in this community.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Any additional questions? Councilmember Brown.
I just have a quick question. Thanks for your presentation. Thanks to everybody. With respect to the request from the Association of Faith Communities to increase the number of spaces made available, I'm just wondering, because I think that's a great idea, and I've been thinking about this, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to ask you previously, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that, and also ask you if we did raise that, could we also suggest that exceptions could be made pending kind of SCPD review, your review, where it seems like it makes sense and upon request of institutions? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Certainly that's your decision as council members to make that. However, I think it depends greatly on the location, the size of the lot, the facilities that are present and available, and also the people that might be there, and the capacity of the Associated Faith Communities to correctly manage that location. We want to make sure that they're able to scale at a pace where they can manage that effectively, so we don't wind up losing the great progress that we made.
I guess that's why I'm just wondering about the possibility of there being some kind of system where you can review that to make a determination if it makes sense based upon the police department's understanding of the particulars of a location.
Yeah, we review many types of permits, and we certainly can do this one as well.
Thanks.
It's a possibility.
Any other questions at this time? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to our public comment portion of this evening's agenda. I had a number of requests for group public sort of speaking time. And I just want to remind those that have made those requests that you're speaking on behalf of your group, and as in order to ensure those that have an opportunity to speak as well, that they're acknowledging that you're speaking on their behalf, and you're going to encourage those members who are here part of your group to avoid any kind of duplicative language. Essentially, that's the intention of having a group presentation. So those that are here that are with the group, please know that Mr. McHenry from Food Not Bombs, Mr. Norris from Huff, Ms. Cool from Homeless United, Ms. Falls, and Mr. Brokaw from the Santa Cruz chapter of the ACLU.
Homeless Union, not Homeless United.
Okay. Thank you for the correction. Santa Cruz Homeless Union and the Santa Cruz chapter of the ACLU of Northern California, as well as Surge from Stepping Up Santa Cruz, have all requested additional time to speak on behalf of your group. And that is a component of the council policy in regards to having them be a united voice in that way. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and ask that any individual who has young children, I do see there is a young child here, can come forward. You'll have up to 2 minutes. Then we'll go ahead and open it up to the 1 minute, and then go ahead and have the group presentations, and then return to the 2 minutes. So please come forward if you'd like 2 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Crystal Sanchez. I'm the president of the Sacramento chapter of the National Homeless Union. I'm here from a very far away. I'm also on the Board of Supervisors of Sacramento Homeless Organizing Committee, as well as Safe Ground. As an elected officials, it is your duty to be morally and ethically right to all of your people. Placing this ban does not provide any type of solutions besides maybe temporarily appeasing some complaints and criminalizing the unhoused. It is, however, placing one or more stress on the homeless that are facing survival. We are in a homeless crisis. Pushing people who are already trying to survive is cruel and unusual punishment, and a way to sidestep Martin versus Boise. Systemic racism, meaning broken policies, is what has caused this crisis. It has caused a society to break, and it's caused failure, pitting residents and businesses against the unhoused and each other. This camping ban will further pit people, as people will be shoved in front of businesses and in neighborhoods and in parks. They have the right to be somewhere. Daily moving is not an option for many. It causes further PTSD and doesn't allow a lot of time for wraparound services. Let's open up buildings, parking garages. Let's work on building bridges as a whole. Homelessness affects everyone. It isn't going to just go away. This needs to be a state effort, community effort. We need to treat this the way that we treat other crises, like fires. Get the resources to the people and open single occupancy shelters. And then as far as your guys' ban, it doesn't say anything about people that work at night. So where are these people that are homeless going to go during this time? These are things that you need to take into consideration. We are all over California, and we are fighting this. Our mayor is Daryl Steinberg, the commissioner of your guys' task force. And this is a mess. We need to do this as a state, not as this community breaking up all these ordinances. Thank you.
Unless there's any other individuals with children here who wanted to address us on this topic, we'll go ahead and see if there's any individual who wants to briefly address us in the 1 minute time frame. Is there any individual who would like to briefly address the council in 1 minute? Please come forward.
Hello, my name is Lee Labrie, and I'm going to say this from my heart, and I certainly don't want to offend anybody in this room at all. But I was going to ask if perhaps we could all come to a mutual agreement about the cemeteries. My husband has recently passed away, and at the cemetery, my girls visiting his grave were catcalled, and I've been yelled at, and I was just hoping that perhaps we could all maybe work together to make the cemeteries a little more sacred and private to someone that wants to be there. And I apologize, I don't mean to offend anybody, and I'm I'm so very sorry about the trauma that Santa Cruz and everybody's under, and the trauma around death in general. But I'm sorry. I was just hoping we could all work together for a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next speaker, you'll have also 1 minute.
I at least want to speak to the car camping. I'd like to, for private lots, I think the numbers were only 5. Right now it's like 2 or 3 per lot. Like if somebody is allowing people to stay on their property, I think you should allow more than, however much they can provide, they should be able to provide. Because where else are they going to go? And if somebody gets impounded, like that's their last refuge before being on the street. So please work on the car camping ordinance.
My name is Fred Antaki. I'm a commercial real estate agent here in Santa Cruz. I manage properties, I represent owners, and I also manage the building where the Santa Cruz Visitor Center is. And we've been dealing a lot with the homeless or unhoused issue for a while as it affects businesses. And I know that this is a community that wants to find justice and safety for everybody. But I also know that if we don't have a place where businesses can do well, it's going to affect the whole city, and people will leave, or they'll choose not to do business here. That said, I hope we look at other alternatives, like the city of Salt Lake City has done in creating housing and building housing using federal, state, and local money to build permanent housing where there's basically you can move into the housing. You don't need to meet all these qualifications first. It's people need housing, then they can get their act together. That's the way it works. So I'd be happy to support that any way I can. So thank you very much.
Next speaker for the 1 minute time frame, please come forward.
Actually, I just have a question. I've been seeing other cities and other states out there building these tiny home villages. Is that something Santa Cruz can consider? And if so, why haven't we done that yet?
Is there any other member of the community that'd like to address us briefly before we have our group presentations? Please come forward. If you could please speak to the microphone. Thank you.
I'm Lucero Luna, and I was at the Phoenix Survival Camp on November 15 at 6:30. We told that we were trespassing and we had 10 minutes to leave. I was told that there were resources, and it was called Santa Cruz Recreational Facility. I stayed there 5 days. The community bailed me out, and I just asked the chief of police and the meals earlier. I said, "Where's my voucher to the Hyatt?" You know, that would be a resource, right? Thank you.
You want to speak for 1 minute? Please come forward.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your service to the city, and thank you, everybody, for being here as part of a democracy. I'm a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz, and I want to speak on behalf of the students in our community. Just a short story. My housemate just started his PhD in neurobiology. Smart kid. He took a really, really bad fall on his bike this past weekend, and he showed up on Sunday evening and his face was completely marred. He said that he couldn't afford the $125 copay for the hospital as a student. And so he waited until Monday to have a professional clean his wounds and confirm that indeed he had broken a rib. By the literal skin of his face, he's going to be able to pay rent to continue living with me in my house this month. So there's that for him, but I beg the city council to consider for other people who face other accidents and where they might be ending up if they can't pay rent in the city. And further, I invite the council to consider what houseless students are expected to do with all of their stuff when they're trying to go to class and get an education. Thank you.
Thank you. Want to take the 1 minute time frame, sir? Were you interested in speaking on behalf of this item in 1 minute at this time? Please come forward.
Thank you. I wanted to sort of reiterate what Angel said. There's definitely a need for people to have a way that they can integrate or self-organize. I was at a meeting for Mauna Kea last night, and what the elders were saying was that there is a place in Hawaii that they set up that is very similar, that is all centered around sacredness. We wake up in the morning and there's a prayer and there's an intention, and there's a definite need for some sort of sacred place that people can go to, because I've heard many stories, and the extremes that people are facing in these situations really cause them to need a healing space. And the spaces that we're providing in the way that they are now, I've heard from women, elder women, aunties, grandmas, that they're embarrassing, that they ruin self-image. And one of the elders said that our enemy is, it's not you, it's not the police, it's hopelessness. So let's bring back hope.
Okay, next speaker, please.
When does desperate human survival become trespass? That'll be a future court case in which the city, among others, may be implicated. I've been looking after a homeless woman, a severely handicapped homeless woman, with the permission of the owners of the place I'm residing in. She stayed at Laurel Street Shelter. There was an uproar involving some men. Somebody threw a chair at her. Now she's got a big wound in the back of her leg. Things like that. How would that woman on crutches be able to access any of these future shelters that are envisioned? That's why we need the police and other community services to take people like her to the shelter when it's available. Thank you.
All right, seeing no other individuals who want to briefly address the council on this item, we'll move to our group presentations. First up is Mr. McHenry from Food Not Bombs, and you'll have up to 4 minutes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to, we talk about beds, but we really should realize these are gym mats that are on floors with your shoulders touching the people to your left and right, and your feet touching the feet of the people at the other end of your gym mat. So beds is a bad, misleading term. I have been in correspondence and in personal conversations with the person responsible for determining the number of available beds and total number of beds per night in the county and in the city, and she does not have any idea what those numbers are. So the numbers that are being quoted here are based on a fiction. Ralph does not know the numbers because no one knows the numbers, because that is the fact. I would also like to point out that I received correspondence and phone calls from Ben Wood. Ben Wood lived on the streets for 2 years and received quite a number of camping tickets. Ben was relieved that after 2 years he moved into a vehicle and had a 40-hour-a-week job, and now his wages are being taken to pay for the camping tickets that he got when he was living on the streets before he was fortunate enough to live in a car, which now he is facing the loss of because of these tickets. And so it's clear that the whole idea of what's going on tonight will just lead to more problems. As a person who rents, when I attempted to rent apartments the last time I was searching, I was denied rental, even though I qualified in all other means, because I have a misdemeanor. Fortunately, I didn't learn about anything else, but that was enough so that I was denied repeatedly accommodations. Now, if you're going to give misdemeanors to homeless people, and they finally get to move into a car, and then they finally get a 40-hour-a-week job, yet the city's going to take their money. I mean, what? And then they can't get into, and they're going to have a misdemeanor conviction, then they can't rent any place. You're waging a war against the people living outside. It's a war. my good friend and a very dedicated volunteer with Food Not Bombs who lives outside named Travis Wheeler, he woke up to find our other friend, Bonnie Hill, dead on the sidewalk less than 1 block from City Hall 2 days after Camp Phoenix was evicted. It's unbelievable that we can have this discussion, that we can have legalese, and I wanted to inform Mr. Andy Mills that there's an actual definition for quality of life crimes, and not one of the words that you pointed to on your PowerPoint presentation actually fall under that definition. Quality of life crimes, which has been came out of the study, the kind of a phony study called Broken Windows study, as actually referring to people sitting outside on Pacific Avenue in our case, or asking for money, or selling, like Eric Gardner, selling single cigarettes when he got killed, not paying fare evasion. There are all these smaller crimes, most of which are crimes, so-called, because a person cannot afford to move inside.
Your time is up. We'll go ahead and have Mr. Norris come up and speak on behalf of his group. Huff.
Does this thing work? Okay. All right, I want to congratulate the community, homeless folks, and the activists who created Camp Phoenix a little more than 2 weeks ago. This was Camp Phoenix, which sheltered 60 to 100 people at 50 tents at no cost to the city. They established ground space rules, entry regulations, and a code of conduct. They provided a vital space for vulnerable women and elders. They brought in toilets and hand washing stations, found food options, and as columnist Bruce Bratton claimed it was, and I think accurately, set it up on territory that was and is of no use to anyone. They were drawing disabled folks into a mutual aid situation that also gave community Samaritan and social service access to them. Housed locals heard and came out to help, leveling the ground, left in lump condition by the city months before. Fire and law enforcement officials came out, offered advice, and most important, assisted rather than arrested or blocked this growing homeless community at first, until the morning of November 15th, when police suddenly appeared and demanded everyone leave, discovering after 5 days that the many folks taking shelter were trespassing. Folks, as during the early rouse at Ross Camp, were given at best 2 days in a motel, and that only for some. Now, I've spent a lot of time in the past focusing on the city's deficiencies, some would say criminal deficiencies, but the real concern is justice and services for the most disabled and vulnerable outside, and just fairness for poor people generally. Set aside the millions of dollars wasted not reaching people in the homeless situation, the endless studies being conducted, and so forth and so on. Those outside tonight and every night throughout the winter have no choice but to shelter themselves. People need to prepare how to deal with the police, how to pick up their property and move, and how to work with local neighborhoods to mutually respect rights and needs. Because this council isn't doing it, it hasn't done it, and it's not going to do it, in my opinion. In Berkeley, when the community kept providing support, city police finally realized it was both too expensive and too futile to go after the first they came for the homeless encampment. I would hope that homeless activists and progressives of all shades and folks in our audience here hold workshops on challenging city police abuses in court and on the streets, and following indifferent city officials to their public meetings and confronting them loudly and repeatedly in real forums where they can't be hushed by a schoolmarm voice who can threaten them with arrest or exclusion. They need our support. For years, activists have been pressing City Council and the city manager for sanctuary villages, as have had limited but real success in a number of cities. Camp Phoenix was formed in memory of Desiree Quintero, the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit, which campers in the earlier Ross Camp. She died in violently windy weather in the Pogonip after she and several hundred other residents were forcibly dispersed from the safer Ross Camp, in violation of commitments from the progressive City Council majority. We meet on the edge of what is predicted to be a violent rainstorm, which may be the first of increasingly severe weather. The mayor, city council, and city staff don't seem able to provide the civic auditorium access for current agenda item tonight, even for a limited period of time, even though it might have been considered of great public interest. Staff, under the disgraced former assistant city manager, Susie O'Hara, has repeatedly dangled promises of homeless shelter, navigation, try to stay awake, please, navigation center overflow shelter space in front of our eyes. But this winter, there is actually less shelter, in spite of the misrepresentations of City Manager Bernal, and virtually no walk-in shelter. City Council will provide no winter survival shelter tonight, nor will it suspend ticketing for closed areas, trespass on private property, public nuisance, blocking the sidewalk, or lodging laws. And those are the real laws, not the camping ordinance we're talking about that will be used through the winter and have been used through the last 2 years.
All right, your time is up. We'll go ahead and invite up Alicia Kuhl to come and speak on behalf of her group at this time. And you'll have up to 4 minutes.
Don't start it yet. At this time, I've invited our legal counsel, Anthony Prince. He would like to go over some points. And I just want to say that due to the negligence of this council, with or without a fancy job, I'm already the homelessness response manager, unfortunately.
Well, good evening, excuse me, members of the council, members of the public. My name is Anthony Prince. As Alicia indicated, I serve as general counsel for the California Homeless Union and for the Santa Cruz Homeless Union. I want to say, first of all, I was invited to come here tonight, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, pardon me, to observe the proceedings and to put forward the position of the union with regard to the, thank you, with regard to the amendments that are being proposed for the camping ordinance. I wanted, first of all, though, to hand the clerk a copy of the letter. I know each and every one of you members of the council received this letter, I believe, but I want to make it part of tonight's record, so I'll go ahead and offer that to the clerk. I want to, first of all, clarify a few things, and that is that the, well, let me just back up and say Mr. Condati made some slight alterations in the proposal based on some of the concerns that were raised in the letter that was co-signed by the Disability Rights California, the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, and the ACLU. If those changes were made within 1 day of receiving that letter. So to me, that suggests that the issues raised in that letter are substantial and bear quite a bit more examination. For example, the letter raises the issue of the ordinance, the amended ordinance would per se declare an unattended camp as a nuisance. That's a very sweeping position for the city to take. Now, that was not adjusted. Mr. Condati did not make an adjustment to the amended ordinance, the proposed amended ordinance, based on that concern raised by the letter. There are many, many concerns raised in the letter. I'm not going to take my time in reiterating them, but I would suggest that the members of the council carefully review that letter. Moreover, I would suggest that the members of the council carefully read the 38-page Martin versus Boise decision of the Ninth Circuit. I am concerned as to the gravity of decisions that may be made tonight or some other time that are not fully informed. You've heard a presentation of the city attorney on what is essentially a very complex issue, complex constitutional questions, without the opportunity for the council to be informed, ask questions, and receive additional information from the authors of the letter, for example. I want to point out to the members of the city council that not only would the city council be, as an entity in the city of Santa Cruz as an entity, possibly be liable for harms resulting from the decisions you may make tonight, But as individual members of the city council, it very well may be that you might, as individuals, be held liable. The general rule of of immunity for a legislative proceeding, there are exceptions to it, and one of them is if the proceeding is actually not a genuine legislative proceeding. I would posit that what's happening here is not a genuine legislative proceeding. That is, if the vote is taken in favor of these amendments. I believe it's a circumvention of the holding of the Ninth Circuit, a form of. I'm sorry.
Fortunately, your time's up.
All right. Well, let me just end by saying that you guys need to carefully consider the consequences here. The state-created danger. You affirmatively put people in Ross Camp at risk of harm.
I have to ask you.
And we had a fatality. Just let me make this point. Thank you. And
I have to ask you to end your comment, please. Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to end.
We actually gave you extra time. Most of the public gets 2 minutes. We gave you 4, so I'm gonna have to ask you to end your comments at this time.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say that.
So I'm gonna have to ask you
what you're doing here. So what you're doing here is taking an action that will put people at risk.
Sir, you've had a warning.
Okay, you can silence me here,
sir.
But
we gave you extra time. We gave your group extra time. There are other people in the audience who would like to speak.
I understand that.
And we're going to be violating their First Amendment right to have their right to speak.
Could I finish my sentence?
We gave you extra time. I'm going to have to ask you to please step down.
Okay.
We will take your comments, but I'm going to have to ask you to please hold your comments.
Once again, I advise all the members to carefully, individually consider what's
for your time.
Before the body. Read the decisions. Read Martin versus Boise. Carefully read the letters, and I would encourage you to invite the attorneys who authored those letters, as well as myself, to come in and have a real discussion, because you're about to do some things which will end in costly litigation, protracted litigation, and will very well may add to the list of people that have died.
Again,
very well may.
Anthony's from out of town. He's not.
That's okay. That's okay.
All right.
That's okay. Let me finish.
It
very well may lead to additional harm or even fatalities.
Okay.
So I'm trying to make this for the record.
Take a recess. We're going to be in recess at this point. And your time is up. And that's a warning. If there's any continued outbreaks, then we're going to go ahead. All right. I'm going to go ahead and call our meeting back to order. If I could get you to please quiet your voices, we're going to come back to order. I'll just briefly remind those in the audience here that it's the responsibility of the presiding officer, whoever that is, whether it's me in this seat at this time or the future mayor, to ensure that we have an opportunity for civic engagement and to do the people's business without continued disruption. And if there is continued disruption, then it's also the responsibility of the presiding officer to intervene so that we can continue to do the work of the city. And I want to remind Mr. McHenry and Mr. Prince, who I believe has stepped out, that I've issued a warning. And if there's continual disruption, I will go ahead and ask the Sergeant of Arms to have you leave. We had an opportunity to hear from you. We want to have an opportunity to hear from other members of the community that want to address the council on this item, and ask that you adhere to the rules of decorum. And if I don't see you continuing to adhere to the rules of decorum, I will go ahead and ask you to leave. I don't want to do that. I'd like to have an opportunity to hear from everybody, and I'd like to have them to be heard, whether you agree with them or not, without disruption or intimidation or distraction with your comments in the audience. It shows respect to your fellow citizens, and I think that's the responsibility of all of us as we engage in this process. So as we left it was group presentations. I'll go ahead and invite up the next group presentation that we had a request for, and that's Stacy Falls and Lee Brokaw from the Santa Cruz chapter of the ACLU of Northern California. And you'll have up to 4 minutes. And I ask those in the audience to let them speak without disruption or interference. So please go forward. You'll have 4 minutes.
Thanks for having us here. We're here representing the ACLU of Northern California. And we find that in general, camping bans, even with these proposed changes, amount to a cruel and unnecessary attack on some of the least powerful, most vulnerable residents of the city. We urge you in the strongest possible terms to reject this camping ban, even with these proposed changes. It is undisputed that there are not enough beds in the city for all the homeless people in the city, which makes Martin versus Boise applicable regardless of whether there is a bed at that moment for that particular person. These changes would open the door to abuse. For example, it's possible that multiple people having various different encounters with different officers on different beats might be cited on the basis that they could have taken one of those 4 to 8 available shelter spots, and what ends up happening is it's sort of a shelter bed version of musical chairs. Moreover, we are concerned about whether police will know at any given moment in time if there are shelter beds available. Can a person be cited even if it is impossible or impractical for the person being cited to get to that shelter space without police transport? If this provision remains, the ordinance should require the notice of an open shelter bed to be in writing, including the date, time, and specific shelter space that the officer believed was available, so the information can be verified later. We also have concerns about the prohibition against daytime use of tents and other things that might constitute an encampment. Prohibiting homeless individuals from setting up a camp from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. just guarantees that homeless people will have to live out of a shopping cart or whatever else they can find for their possessions. It is cruel to force people to assemble and disassemble their tents, pack and unpack all their belongings, particularly in the pouring rain, when it's guaranteed that everything will end up absolutely sopping wet. Moreover, Martin referred to the impropriety of ordinances prohibiting sleeping, sitting, or lying in public, not just sleeping, and was tied to the availability of shelter. A person has a constitutional right to be in public at any time. Any other reading would require unhoused persons to be in a perpetual state of standing for 15 hours per day. Furthermore, we are concerned about what enforcement of this ordinance looks like. That is, how does a police officer know if someone is homeless and hanging out in the park with a tent with the intention of staying all night, or maybe it's just somebody like Jeff Bezos having an outing in the park with a tent? How do we avoid people being profiled based on the way they look? It is very clear that there is a crisis in the availability of affordable housing. Camping bans do not solve this problem. They, in fact, make the problems worse because people end up with criminal records. That makes it even harder to find a job or to find housing or even to apply for public benefits. And these types of approaches are also really expensive. Solutions to homelessness will require extensive investment in affordable housing, job opportunities, accessibility, and a range of public services. But as long as the city, police, and some of our businesses believe that the evidence of homelessness can be hidden or swept away by policing and criminalization, there will never be enough money for us to adequately address the real issues.
Good job.
Okay, the last speaker is Serge Cagno on behalf of his group and membership that he's speaking on behalf of this evening, Stepping Up Santa Cruz. We'll go ahead and let, Serge, go ahead, please. You'll have up to 4 minutes.
Okay, this time I'm going to talk louder because I never talk loud enough. Bonnie Hill, who I don't know if it's confirmed it was her. She was a super sweet woman. She stayed at winter shelter a few times. I'm really sad. Like, if you knew her, she was the little cutie. I hope you come December 19th to the Homeless Memorial. It'll be at Harvey West at 10 a.m. And we'll, every year we have a memorial for all the homeless who have died in our community. I'm glad that we talked about health in all policies earlier. I think that's important, and I'm glad that that is some of the Santa Cruz thinking as opposed to the bigger political thinking that doesn't make these kind of thoughts. I wish that in this thing too, we can find some way to do it. And I really understand the frustration of the police and understand the city manager and the city attorney of their job. They're not social servants. They're not doing social services. None of you guys are right now running a shelter or doing social services either. It's not your job to get somebody into some sort of program or get somebody into housing, that kind of thing. We all serve in different ways and we do different things. But to design these programs that are about criminalizing a behavior because we're frustrated with the behavior. And when I hear the police chief say that they have no tools in their tool belt, I understand that because they're policemen. They're not when I try to connect with somebody who doesn't want to be in any service, and the resistance is they're dealing with police and enforcement far more than they're dealing with social workers and outreach. If we were doing that kind of thing and when trying to meet people. So another thing that Chief Mills mentioned was some people do not want help or assistance. How do we gain compliance? So on the catch, we did a quick survey, 75 people. Why will you not accept winter shelter this winter? Reasons. And these are also things that it wouldn't work in the middle of the night with a policeman trying to get them into shelter. Been kicked out. Sexual offender registry. They have lice, bed bugs, scabies, or they're afraid of getting them from the shelter and they don't want to go. Anxiety and PTSD because they're pretty close together. There's like 8 inches between people a lot of the time. Snoring, it's crazy loud there. Can't leave at night, that drives some people nuts. Poor training by staff and feeling disrespected. Can't keep all of their belongings, stuff stolen. Having a pet that's not a service dog, can't go. Non-ADA accessible bathrooms and showers, and don't want to feel the judgment. For the people who are in wheelchairs and do smell like poo, they don't want to be around people who are going to judge them when they can't change their circumstance. They don't go to the shelter because of that. And other people, head injury, stroke, heart attack, the different things that make you choose different ways. There is a lot of stuff that goes into it when a policeman is talking to somebody about, hey, we have a shelter bed for you, go or I'm going to cite you or arrest you. There's a lot that goes into that conversation. And I hope that, I think that a lot of this stuff has to be worked out a little bit more, something smoother, an outreach team or something else that can be working with people, that can be building relationships and stuff like that. Because that 2 a.m. conversation is not going to go well because they don't have the tools to do it. They're not set up that way. They're not funded with social workers to go with them at night. I'm glad that there was talk of the letter from the Disabilities Right California, ACLU of Northern California National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. I hope you do read that because it says a whole bunch of things that were problematic with that. I'm not a lawyer. I can't say which one's right.
Your time is up, Serge.
Yeah. And there were a few recommendations from the catch, too.
Time is up. Thank you. Okay. We're going to go ahead and open it up now to the remaining public comment. Please come forward and you'll have up to 2 minutes.
Mayor Watkins, Attorney Condotti, Martin Bernal, Chief Mills, and others. You are systematically and persistently violating the civil and human rights of your constituents who you are elected to serve. Just because they don't live in a gleaming mansion on the west side doesn't mean that the homeless don't deserve to be treated with any less dignity or be any less represented in how their government operates than millionaires or billionaires. Through ill-advised efforts to sweep homelessness out of public view, the leaders of the city of Santa Cruz have violated the majority of the articles of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights in one form or another. Here are some examples. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 13, everyone has the right of freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Article 17, everyone has the right to own property, alone as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. Article 25, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. So what do I need to do? Ask the UN Human Rights to send a humanitarian mission here to respond to the dire situation that our homeless population is facing now that it's cold and raining with winter coming soon, and the city's response is woefully inadequate? And a couple of more comments. Restricting sleeping at night, or only at night, does not serve people who work at night. And how many city staff have been assaulted by homed people?
Next speaker.
This has been an amazing evening so far, and what I want to talk about is quite a bit different, and in some ways I'm addressing it to everyone who's sitting up here, but it's not mostly what we've heard. I was away last night. I arrived about 12:30 this afternoon, very tired. It had started to rain. The heat was off where I lived. It was quite cold in my house, so I turned on the TV, wanted to see what was happening here, and the first thing that struck me was how bundled up all of you were. Scarves, sweaters, heavy coats, and tonight, and every time you meet, you are acting on the fate of a whole lot of people in Santa Cruz who are unhoused. I want you to think about that. There you are with your warm things, you know, me too. And you are part of a group of people to which I belong, and we are called the housed privileged. It's kind of like white privilege, only it's growing up with the knowledge that you probably always will have a roof over your head if you want it. You might want to go camping, you might want to hitchhike across the country, but you're privileged, and I am privileged. And I think this is so important to remember on a night like this, every time you meet, every time these rules come up for you. The other thing I wanted to speak about was how trespassing gets in the way of everything else that has been talked about. But many other people have addressed that, and maybe I'll put it in writing to you, because I think it's an important issue that really hasn't been made central. How all the public property in this town is now a park and off limits.
Members of the council, my name is John Hall, and I'm a professor of sociology at UCSC. I want to take a step back from a lot of the discussion that's been really eloquent, and a lot of people have said far better than I what social scientists have said. I also want to point to what Chief Mills said. You're not going to solve the homeless problem with this ordinance. I would go further than that. You're going to increase the homeless problem with this ordinance. And I'm just going to read from the Oxford University Press journal Social Problems from a recent abstract of an article on criminalization of poverty perpetuates homelessness. This research examines how anti-homeless laws produce various forms of police interactions that fall short of arrest, yet have wide-ranging impacts on the urban poor. Their analysis shows that the mechanisms through which consistent punitive interactions, including move-along orders, citations, and destruction of property, systematically limit homeless people's access to services, housing, and jobs while damaging their health, safety, and well-being. Their findings also suggest that anti-homeless laws and enforcement fail to reduce urban disorder, but create instead a spatial churn in which homeless people circulate between neighborhoods and police jurisdictions rather than leaving public space. They argue that these laws and their enforcement, which affected the majority of the participants that they study, constitute a larger process of pervasive criminalization, consistent punitive interactions with state officials that rarely result in arrest, but that do material and psychological harm. In short, you're not solving the homeless problem. You need to do that.
Next speaker.
Darius Mosinine again. First, I want to say I think the camping ban as rewritten is very fair, very compliant from what our city attorney tells us. But I have to look around. I look at the activists. I look at the majority of the homeless folks in this town. I look at their activists. They all have one thing in common. They're white people. This is a white people problem, complete with white privilege. It's like the most perverse.
We'll go ahead and pause the time. We're going to go ahead and let you speak. Ms. Cool, if you please could keep your comments to yourself. We've had an opportunity to hear from you. Whether we agree or disagree, we're going to listen to other people. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a warning. It's multiple times I had to stop the meeting to allow this process to ensue. Everybody has an opportunity to speak. As long as they adhere to the rules of decorum, we're going to go ahead and allow them to speak, even if we disagree with their comments. Please, I'm going to go ahead and ask those and the members of the community to not speak up. This is this person's opportunity to speak at this time. Go ahead.
Look to our Latino neighbors. They come here with the obstacles, some of them with an obstacle of being undocumented. They're not looking for a voucher to the Hyatt. They're not looking to camp on the Water Street Bridge for 3 months. They're not looking for a homeless garden project. They have their garden project. It happens to be called Driscoll Strawberries at 6 a.m. 5 days a week.
Okay, I will go ahead and ask you to leave. I will go ahead and ask you to leave.
All I say is...
All right, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to pause your comments. Mr. Kandati, my understanding is that this is something I need to allow to have heard at this time. Is that correct?
I didn't hear anything in the comments that would provide the council with the ability to cut off the speaker, no.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and allow you to finish your comments. Go right ahead.
All I'm saying is instead of stomping, clapping, cutting locks, breaking fences, engage with the Latino community. Figure it out. Understand how they get through living here in the most expensive housing market in the country. And any expansion of this camping ban is simply an expansion of white privilege. Thank you.
Next speaker, you'll have up to 2 minutes. Next speaker, you'll have up to 2 minutes.
Sorry.
Mr. Norris, if people are leaving, please don't intimidate with your comments after they are able to speak. Go right ahead.
Please be free to speak.
Go for it.
My name is Elise Casby. I have been studying the homeless issue firsthand since 2009. I was residing in Berkeley, and I started coming over to Santa Cruz. The first thing I want to say is that I strongly urge all the city council members to firmly reject the proposed changes to this ordinance. My most basic plea to you is a plea to please have mercy. I want you to know something else. My brother was developmentally disabled at birth. My mother had multiple sclerosis. I became homeless because of domestic violence of my father. I'm not prepared to go into it more now. I'm also not prepared to detail what I experienced at the shelters in Santa Cruz, but it was really awful. That's all I can tell you right now about my personal situation. I also began a career in the mental health field, which was pretty much changed with the advent of Ronald Reagan's dissembling of our public mental health system. So the reason I'm asking you for mercy tonight is because I know from firsthand experience that most of the homeless people that are out there are Vietnam vets who are suffering from PTSD, are homeless people, many with very severe mental illnesses such as schizophrenia. Many have severe physical disabilities. We need to stop using the police force as a point of contact with the homeless people. This absolutely has to stop. It's so frightening in the context of where we are with such laws as the National Defense Authorization Act, removal of many of our civil rights under this rubric of terrorism. I'm terrified right now of going to jail, but I have to say that I am sincerely contemplating civil disobedience in the face of these ordinances. Thank you.
Mayor, Council, Brent Adams, not speaking for the Warming Center right now. Where are the other agencies who get the multi-millions of dollars for homelessness? They're not in this room. And there's a reason for that. Federal government says all the millions and billions that go to homelessness have to follow a housing first paradigm. And most of them, that's why we see the Homeless Services Center changing to Housing Matters. Wherever money pulls up, that's where programs exist. Where all the money is in homelessness in this country, they're not in this room. So the people are freaking out because there's really little else that can happen. I see a division on this board. You are all the people of the community. This is the government. It's a factory. Mr. Kandati said he's in contact with many other cities. So it's not about people. They own things. They own the city. We just live in it. But what's true between the protest tendency, Take Back Santa Cruz County syringes and wanting more police, and us activists wanting to end camping bans and things, there's a space in the middle for us people to actually benefit and end homelessness authentically, not ending homelessness through yada, 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 but actually, and Drew brought a lot of things in earlier in his time here. I wish that the more moderate council people would have championed it, which is transitional encampments, safe sleeping zones, parking programs, all very robust, warming centers. Finally, the mythological navigation center, which really picks people who have access to money and puts them on the pathway to housing. Pathway to housing is actually a golden bridge to nowhere. It's a huge lie. It's a huge farce, and we're all stuck in it. It's a train running out of control, and all we can do is just scream, and we're upset. But through scalability, we can actually demand that we provide enough shelter beds for every single person who comes through the door. I ask, and forgive my pretzel logic, I don't know what I'm asking here, but I think if from the bottom rung, you have to help support something like Warming Center and other programs like that.
Thank you. All right, next speaker.
Good evening, council members. My name is Steve Schnarr. On my way to City Hall this evening, I had to go over the bridge in San Lorenzo Park, the pedestrian bridge. There were several people trying to get a tiny bit of shelter from the rain under the bridge. It was extremely windy. It was dark. It was cold. It was well before the hour at which it would be allowed to be sleeping. This conversation, which is the perennial Santa Cruz conversation, it strikes me a little bit like in Washington when we have a Congress full of millionaires making decisions about working people, and you'll see periodically in certain states or groups full of men who are making decisions about abortion. So we have year after year people who have the ability to have shelter every night and warmth making decisions in which the people who are without are the quality of life of the town, it considers those people kind of just an impact on our quality of life, which is the people who have wealth and stable housing. So I understand there are legitimate concerns and conflicts that happen when hundreds or thousands of people are forced to use public space as their private space. I've had plenty of personal encounters that reflect what Chief Mills or one of the other presenters showed, which was that people who are unsheltered commit crimes at a higher rate. I've had threats and problems, but to me, the threshold of human rights is everybody deserves to have basic dignity, shelter, clothing. And if we can't provide that first, it's immoral and unacceptable to criminalize what, for us, we take for granted what other people are trying to get by.
Brian O'Neill, attorney and citizen. I would like to make 3 points. First, the ordinance language is irrelevant with respect to constitutionality. In fact, the city of Boise tried this exact tactic by adding language to its camping ban that law enforcement officers shall not enforce when there is not available shelter space, and the court found that the language was not controlling. The existing ordinance is not unconstitutional due to wording, but lack of shelter space. This ordinance runs the risk of signaling that enforceability is valid when enforceability of the camping ban has been and will continue to be whether there is adequate shelter space. The ordinance does not set a protocol for determining if and when there is adequate shelter space, creating additional administrative burdens to investigate on a daily and case-by-case basis in real time when we just heard that that's not possible. Second, the Boise court did not prevent municipalities from implementing valid time and place restrictions, but constitutional jurisprudence suggests that such restrictions must, quote, leave open ample alternative channels to exercise one's rights. While this ordinance merely continues the same citywide ban as before, I would respectfully suggest that the council direct your staff to do the difficult work of crafting a more nuanced and constitutionally valid time and place ordinance that identifies the specific areas where involuntary sleeping will and will not be allowed. Finally, I respectfully request that the council does not, if they do adopt the ordinance, add language specifically stating that violations are a civil infraction that do not establish probable cause to search and seize individuals merely for the act of sleeping. Adding such language is necessary to specifically protect individuals' Fourth Amendment rights, in particular because of past statements from the city attorney and the chief of police with respect to the Main Beach camping ban. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. My name is Barbara Riverwoman. I'm a preschool teacher. I was a preschool teacher for 15 years, and I'm appealing to you now as a teacher and to ask you to remember the classrooms that you were in, what worked and what didn't work. I especially appeal to you, Mayor Watkins, as an educator, a teacher, and someone who cares about children. Rules upon rules upon rules upon rules. Every good teacher knows that doesn't work. The one thing that I learned over 15 years as a teacher is that relationships work. We have to build relationships with children. We have to learn to understand them, respect them, listen to them, talk to them. I want to thank Chris and Drew and Sandy for their presence at the Ross camp. When we were down there, they were there. They were talking to people. They were relating to them. They heard their stories. I did not see the other 4 of you down there. Maybe you were there. I would like all of you as council members, especially the 4 of you, to apologize to them that you can't do better. Maybe we can't do better. It's a systemic problem. It's a national problem. It's a horrible problem. We're all grieved by it. Nobody's happy. Why can't you apologize to the people in this room who are going to go out into the streets some night, tonight, in the rain, the cold? I hated to come here tonight. It's cold and rainy and freezing. I had the pleasure to meet Lucero the other day and have a long talk with her. It was wonderful for me to have that talk with her, to learn about her life in Mexico, about the hardships she went through coming from extreme poverty, about how she became an early childhood teacher trainer, family daycare trainer. This makes a big difference to me. Let's build relationships, not make more rules.
Thank you.
You have an important question to ask yourselves, and that's how you plan on treating the most vulnerable members of our community.
You have a choice tonight. You can choose, if you want to listen to the homeless women and men who speak here. Listen, really listen to their concerns, and you can choose to work with them to accommodate their most essential and basic needs. That would be the approach of a rational and compassionate human being, which I can only assume many of you claim yourselves to be. The other option that you can choose is to listen to the familiar and the privileged voices of the affluent. By even allowing this ordinance to continue existing, your intentions become entirely transparent. The plan is to torture and displace the people experiencing homelessness through endless citations, sleep deprivation, and thievery. You plan to systematically criminalize the self-organization and survival of the victimized homeless people in Santa Cruz, with the end goal of kicking them out of their own city. It's reasonable to ask ourselves who the real criminals are here. Are the criminals the homeless union who are trying to live in solidarity and build a tolerable existence for themselves? Or are the criminals the members of this community working to crush the efforts of the homeless union for their own benefit? Are the criminals the poor, or is it the city manager as he oversees the closure of an autonomous shelter for the homeless and intends to maintain an anti-camping measure that is so extreme it will not even allow people to sleep in their cars or RVs? I'd like to remind you that our enemy is poverty. Our enemy is not the poor.
Hello, I'm Nancy Crusoe, and what's on my mind tonight is the immediate need for a place to be. I was at the storage program tonight working before coming over here as part of Warming Center program. And I had to turn out a man and woman, and the rain was pouring and the wind was blowing fiercely, and they were thanking me for staying late to help them get stuff for the night. And I did want to cry because they're walking into the night. And it's going to be like this several days this week. I think there may be one day of respite when the sun will shine and it doesn't rain. But tomorrow on Thanksgiving, Warming Center will open because of we're going to have a heavy rain tomorrow. And we will continue to open probably during the rainy period. But taking the gap that's obviously created by the lack of shelter space, and I'm not advocating shelter as the solution. I've heard so many. I wouldn't want to be there. Okay, but there's people who won't be going anywhere, and we simply have to have a place. We simply have to. So I am speaking for the Warming Center. I would like some support. I think we will be filling that gap. And I know that it's going to take a while for you to get together to have more spaces, but we will start day after tomorrow on Thanksgiving. We are primarily volunteer run, and we really do need support from the city. If I have another minute, I want to say this. Oh, shoot.
But you're welcome to leave your comments with us. You're welcome to leave the comments.
No one can read them.
Okay,
Thank you.
Please come forward.
2 minutes. I'm going to learn how to use this. I'll watch it. First of all, good to be here. I'm going to be on a positive note. I think tonight proved that we don't have the apathy, we have empathy. And I invite everybody to come and stand in line. I've done it since, I don't know, way back when, at the Vet Center, to see the community come together to care about the people we're talking about. We don't care for the Vet Center annual Thanksgiving dinner. But I want to speak to you in 130 seconds. Some of you remember Emily Riley. This coming, I hope to put out a email, you'll do some research of what was Women Rise for Peace, because that was a big project, remember? How about Women Rise for the Homeless and invite the faith-based to hold it up at the Peace Church with peace and social justice? Everybody in our city has been up there for some special event. If you remember, it was a World Cafe. I don't know some of these people. I'd like to meet them. I'd like to have relationships. There's somebody with a badge. As it was World Cafe, I think the only one that knows a little bit about what I'm doing is Drew. So the next mayor, please, you're up at UC. I'm over at Cabrillo. Please look at youthpower.org and bring it to this council to talk about it. What would it look like if we had a youth mayor, a youth city council, and leaked up for UC and Cabrillo, and put them on like a next generation commission, give them the task like Drew does with the interns to do the research and do a report. Don't put it up in the library. Bring it to you to see what they would do to solve both the problem of homeless, but proactive prevention. Because you're going to have a job next year with the county too. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Who knows? I have a couple cell phone numbers, and please come and stand in line and talk to those people Thursday. But enjoy the turkey, and we can be a town that represents all of you. So it's past my bedtime, but I'm staying. Thank you, and I did pretty good.
All right, brother.
Who will these ordinances help? I can't see it at all. I see people over here talking about a $20 fee, which there are other fees on top of that, but we'll be silent about that. We won't mention that. Let's say a person lives outside. That means they ain't got no $20. You give him a $20 citation, how you gonna pay that? So then you get another one and another one. Oh, now he's getting misdemeanors, which turn into another charge. He didn't show up for court and this and that. That you're creating criminals. What good did that possibly do? How can this person ever come up? He getting a criminal record for something you did, your work. I see the chief and I see his officers out there in the world. They're professional, patient, a couple other things, but y'all got me talking fast. I see leaders in this room. Brett, I see 4 right there. This guy right here is very smart. Did you hear what he said? We got a lawyer over there. Let him create these ordinances. He'll do a better job than what we got sitting over here.
Yeah, brother.
This guy over here, I don't know what he do in his office. What do you do? How smart are you? Can you be? I'm serious with the work that I've heard. How smart are you? I question you. I'm not talking about you. You kind of all right. The guy sitting next to you. I see that guy right there, Drew. I see governor, and that's why I be getting ready to say, good, but it's Glover. Your work is pathetic. You folk need to go, and I don't care where. I got something, but I'm too riled up. Get the point of the message, and it's all true. It's all real. I ain't creating nothing. It's all real. It's your work product.
Next speaker.
Ooh, don't start yet. I gotta take a breather. Okay, my name is Jennifer Lanford Brown, and the whole point of me coming to the city councils have been lost in my harm reduction. So I was a senior mortgage loan officer for almost 20 years. I have a master's degree and had to dumb down my resume. I have a master's degree in criminal law. I actually wrote the rules when 1220 programs started. Chris Monteith turned them in. They became cityfied, that whole hold harmless agreement that we used. I was assistant manager at the camp. I was down there pulling everybody out. I was at sleep outs. I've worked at every shelter. It doesn't work, guys. I was homeless 7 months, disabled veteran, husband in a wheelchair. I had $1,400 in tickets. How did I pay those? You can look me up, Google me, and you'll find I have a degree from William & Mary. It doesn't work, guys. And the only thing, I worked at the Armory. We had to turn people away. I worked at Salvation Army. I left there happy. I loved working with the people. But the way that it's said the shelter systems are set up, the police can't do that. I was married to an assistant chief of police in Newport News, Virginia, previously. And I realize the hardships of the police officers. They cannot do this. Do not put this on them at all. They can't. I live on Felker Street, by the way. And I lived at 155. I live at 125 now. I just moved up the street. Totally give all your money to Brent or something like that, because he's got more going on with no money. Salvation Army is worldly.
Hello, Wes White from Salinas, co-president of the Salinas Monterey County Homeless Union. Just calling in opposition to this ordinance. In Salinas, seems like Salinas and Santa Cruz have similar attitudes when it comes to homelessness. You know, you folks are making millions of dollars in grant money from state and federal agencies to say you're going to help the homeless. Well, if that's the case, then why is law enforcement the only department to come out and service people? You're supposed to have continuum of care. We just had a big blowout at the Leadership Council, our continuum of care in Monterey, San Benito counties, where our California Homeless Union made a representation about sweeps. How many sweeps happen in Salinas? And this is the same kind of attitude. It's all about, no, you can't be here. No, you can't be here. Well, where can you go? If you can't offer a person where to go, then you shouldn't be just driving people out. You need to give people a yes, just like the other lady said. She's a teacher. I'm a teacher too. You can't just tell kids, no, don't run, because the only thing they hear is run. So you have to say walk. Okay, you're not trying to provide any kind of solutions. You're just trying to provide a block to push people out, which creates a state-created danger. And you folks are setting yourselves up for liability. In fact, on Friday last week, 35 city, county, state, and federal representative agencies, politicals, all met to say, Salinas, the sweeps is not the best course of action for this crisis. And what you're doing right now is the same kind of thing. If you pass this, it's everything about hating people and nothing about helping people. So which way are you really thinking about going? Because your attitude on this vote right now, if you got over 4 people say yes on this, you people are haters.
Amen. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Tatanka Bricka. Wow. So it's a much bigger problem than just Santa Cruz. I would urge us to use the Declaration of Human Rights, as difficult as it might sound, as a basis for crafting what we do with local homelessness. I would encourage us to cooperate fully with efforts at the state and national level. This is maybe just a preview of something that will come to the council later about a California Green New Deal, which is being crafted by Romero Institute right in this town, which will provide, I can't go into it, but solving the housing and homeless problem is a part of solving climate change and is a part of full employment and is a part of realizing human rights for all of us. So let's work together as best we can locally, but it's a bigger problem. As you know, I was the first organizer for Amnesty International in this country, and I also served on the Sheriff's Advisory Team, and appreciate Mr. Mills for being involved with Armistice last year, and I do understand what he's saying about it's not their job to do this, and everybody has spoken about how what we're trying to do to help will make things worse. So we need a total reorientation of the consciousness, build it on human rights, and let's create a California Green New Deal, because we can pass that here. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Scott Graham. When the city when you all voted to suspend the camping ordinance, the police continued to ticket campers. They just used other laws, which basically is not within the spirit of the decision on Boise. The spirit of that law is if somebody is outside, they're homeless, they're sleeping, and there's no place for them to go, the spirit of that law is you don't give them a ticket for something else. You let them sleep. You leave them alone. You know, I mean, I imagine there's some circumstances where you want to have somebody move out of the way or whatever if they're completely blocking the sidewalk, but basically the spirit of that law, that decision was to let people be if there's no place for them to be. And this rewrite of the law is no better. It's just trying to, do the soft shoe around what the decision was. And the decision is that people that don't have anywhere to go and you have no place for them to go should be left alone. Now, you've not found another way to ticket them. And, as the chief said, you give somebody a bunch of tickets, then it goes to collections. What good does it do to send a homeless person to collections? They don't even have an address for them to, write a letter to say, hey, you owe us a bunch of money. I mean, it makes no sense to be traveling down this road the way you're headed with this ordinance. It's better to just, 3/4 of the, two-thirds of the, a third of the
Your time
police
is up.
budget
Your time is up.
is
Thank
spent
you.
on homelessness.
Your time is up. Thank you very much.
That's insane.
Okay, thank you. Your time is up. Okay, we'll go ahead and... All right. We're going to go ahead and close public comment at this time and return back to the council for action and deliberation. I want to remind those in the audience that I asked you to respect your fellow citizens when they spoke about things that you didn't agree with. I also ask you that you continue to respect this process, even if there's things that come up here that you don't agree with. I've had to stop our council proceedings this evening multiple times to restore the meeting so we can continue with the business. And I don't want to have to ask people to leave, but I will do so if it's continuing to be a problem. I do want to recognize the fact that no matter when this item or when this topic comes before the council, that it is clearly and obviously an incredibly complex social challenge that incites a lot of emotion, and rightfully. And we, as a council here before us, agendized this for this evening to have a discussion around how what I believe our staff here is presenting, how to balance these complex social challenges. So that's what brings us back to this process, and then now leads to us to have to make an informed policy decision. So at this time, I'll go ahead and acknowledge Vice Mayor Cummings and then Councilmember Glover for potential action or comments.
So I want to start by thanking all the people who came out tonight to speak up and provide their comments on this issue. It's, as the mayor just said, it's a very difficult topic that we're constantly trying to address. I'd also like to thank the city manager's office because, just acknowledging the fact that we have more year-round spaces, I think that's something that's very important for our community to understand that we are making strides. I'd also like to thank the city attorney's office and the police chief and the police officers for, taking more of a compassionate approach to trying to address this issue in our community. And then I also want to thank the county supervisors for helping us with the funding that we've been able to use over the past year that has helped us pay for the Ross Camp, the facilities and the cleanup, and additionally to 1220 River Street. Our community is trying to do the best it can with the resources that we have to address this very complex issue. And we definitely need our surrounding municipalities to also help us as we're trying to provide shelter, because in many of the unincorporated areas and in some of the cities that surround Santa Cruz, we don't find them offering the same amounts of shelter, and we need everyone to help out in this effort. With regards to this item, I have a motion prepared, but really just want to encourage us to not only, and the folks in this community, to not only come and address us here in Santa Cruz at our city council meetings, but also to address the county supervisors and cities that are in the surrounding areas who don't offer as many shelters, so that we can do a joint regional effort at trying to address our homelessness issue. And so I'm going to make a couple motions that we maybe need to separate, but the first is to direct staff to work with the county on increasing winter and year-round shelter capacity, on-call beds, and temporary relocation of the River Street camp during construction. And I'd just like to emphasize that we really try to put pressure on trying to find more shelter in the unincorporated areas. And then the second part is to send the city's amended camping ordinance and the county camping ordinance to the catch for expeditious review and recommendations for a countywide response. There's a lot of pieces of this ordinance that I'm very much in favor of, but as we've received some new information tonight, we first received this ordinance late on Friday, and we've been receiving a lot of comments from members of the catch, members of the community, who really want us to take a little bit of a step back to reviewing it in more detail, allow the community with more opportunity to respond. And part of the reason why we put the catch together in the first place was so that a group of community members could make recommendations on very big items such as the one that's before us today. And so I think that that would be the most appropriate way of dealing with this issue tonight, and that's it.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Mayor Cummings, seconded by Councilmember Crone, Councilmember Glover, and then Councilmember Brown.
Just a show of hands up here on the dais. How many, have any of you ever slept outside in Santa Cruz without a tent or just a sleeping bag on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
You have? Mm-hmm. What was that experience like?
Fine.
It's fine. And it was, but it was
I was camping.
You were camping. See, but there's a difference between sleeping outside and unsheltered and camping. And I think that's what we really need to stress here in this conversation, because we keep using the term camping when in reality what we're talking about is trying to sleep. I ask because there was a petition that's circulating around online, which I'm sure some of you saw, encouraging us as elected officials to sleep outdoors and experience what it's like. And this last Friday, I took up that challenge, which I appreciate the police chief reading my blog that I wrote, and I slept outside unsheltered with a sleeping bag. And it was probably one of the most exhausting and difficult experiences I have had in a very long time. It was not only difficult in finding winter gear that was affordable in Santa Cruz, and this was before it was starting to rain, but also in carrying all of the equipment around with me, which was just the bare minimum of a light backpack and a sleeping bag, but while I was wearing all of the winter gear. So while I'm walking, I'm sweating profusely, I'm trying to get from one place to another. Then when you get tired and you sit down, the wind hits you and then you get cold again. And that doesn't even talk about the things that I saw while I was out walking around. I mean, I don't know if y'all go out at night and walk around and look at what's going on, but we have elders, community elders that are 60 plus sleeping on hard cement, like areas of the ground. We have people leaning up against buildings, mumbling to themselves because they don't have somewhere to go. I saw a 62-year-old woman sitting, or mid-60-year-old woman sitting at a bus stop, surrounded by all of her belongings, like rocking back and forth and talking to herself because she didn't have a place to go. People bent over on the cleaning dirt out of the sidewalks, going through trash cans. Like, these are people that need a place to stay, and what we're contemplating right now is making it more difficult for them to exist. And like, not only that experience of witnessing just the sheer human suffering that was going on, it's raining now. And when I was sleeping on the ground, it was dry. So when I woke up in the morning, all of my stuff would have been wet. There would have been nowhere for me to go, especially if it's like middle of the night. Then I had to try to find a bathroom, which when I woke up in the morning, which in itself was crazy to have to pack up my stuff. I saw an old man, that person, Jerry, that you talked about. I walked past Jerry the morning, and he's pushing himself in a wheelchair by his heels down the street, and one of the wheels is lopsided, so he has to readjust himself every 20 feet from where he's going. That guy's like, like, these are the people that are on the street right now, and we're talking about creating additional ordinance language that would further criminalize them so that we have tools in our toolbox. I think that that's problematic on a lot of levels. It's nice to hear the vice mayor wanting to refer it to the catch, but we have to keep in mind, and, you know, as being one of the people that suggested and made the motion to create the catch, it's a little problematic in some of the responses they've come back with. There's a lot of great stuff that's come out from, you know, some different suggestions, but, like, for example, access to bathrooms, all they want to do is add 2 more porta potties downtown. I mean, that's substantially less than what we need to be doing. So I would encourage us to be more intentional with this analysis of the ordinance, and instead of just sending it to catch, making sure that there's incorporation from advocates, service providers, the Santa Cruz Homeless Union specifically, since they are engaged in working with the population that are on the streets in Santa Cruz.
I'm sorry to interrupt you for just a second. I'm going to go ahead and ask that you either stand in the back with your sign or you take a seat as you're obstructing the view of those behind you with your sign. You're welcome to stand in the way back if you like with your sign, or you could take a seat if you like.
Is this really what's stopping? Can I continue?
Yeah, you may continue.
An incorporation of multiple entities, not just from the catch, to be able to get their analysis of what's going on with this ordinance, as well as including the motion for staff to prepare a list of possible locations for safe sleeping zones. Because I don't think it's relevant for us to be having a conversation about ordinances that are only applicable if people are in specific areas, if we don't have specific areas lined out. Also, is coming forward with the draft SOPs, which the catch wants to look at anyway. And I don't think it's feasible for us to even pass this ordinance or to enact it if we don't have those SOPs in place. So why are we putting the cart before the horse before we even understand how we're going to enforce it or the situation that surrounds it? Why are we going to prioritize the ordinance first as opposed to the SOPs? And then also, I think it would be great to instruct staff to look into how we can intentionally incorporate more social workers into our strategy of engagement to build relationships, as was brought up by a community member, instead of focusing on the police, which sound like they are overwhelmed already with what's going on. So I appreciate the motion or the intent in it, but can you be a little bit stronger in some of your intention to make sure that we have a robust analysis of the ordinance associated with the SOPs and looking at safe parking or safe sleeping spaces, so when we come back, it's not going to be okay, let's pass the ordinance. Oh, wait a minute, we have to do the SOPs. Okay, let's do wait a minute, let's figure out the safe sleeping zones. Why are we not doing these and coinciding them together? I'd ask the maker of the motion.
Well, I have Councilmember Brown, and then if you want. Councilmember Brown had initiated that she wanted to speak to the item, so I'm acknowledging Councilmember Brown, and then I'll go ahead and acknowledge the Vice Mayor if he wants to respond to your questions.
Okay. I have a couple of questions for the motion maker as well. I just want to say that I have a really hard time trying to address this issue as a member of the City Council. When I was a member, an activist in the community, it was really clear to me what we needed to do. And being on this side of the dais, it continues to really disturb me that we have not been able to come up with solutions. And I do not believe that further ways of criminalizing unhoused for their lack of housing and the behaviors associated with that it's not going to serve us well. I also understand that there are concerns about, and that until we have a whole network of wraparound services and the ability the resources to fund that, not just at the city. I mean, that is a regional, it's a county issue, it's a regional issue, it's a state issue, it's a national issue, and we, as a society, are failing miserably. Now, I could go on and on about my feelings about that, but it's not going to get us anywhere. I guess I want to say that I support the idea of sending this the proposal to the catch. I think that they are planning to address us on the SOPs and some other matters. I think that this is something that I appreciate that a lot of work has gone into this at staff and the city attorney's office and the police chief and the city manager's office. A lot of thinking about this has gone into this thinking. So it's not like people are sitting around and saying, well, there's, not thinking about what else we can do. It's a real serious challenge to figure that out. I think that we need to take responsibility and try and figure that out at the same time, and that the kind of camping, the criminalizing and, strengthening of a camping ordinance before we do that is not going to serve us as a community. But I do support the motion, and I would just ask the maker of the motion if you might consider two additions. And one is just to be specific about when sending the amended camping ordinance to the catch for expeditious review. I think that Councilmember Glover was trying to get at, as kind of a more serious review. I'm not sure exactly what kind of language, but if there's something that could kind of strengthen the intention to have that, comprehensive, serious, and expeditious review, and to include in that the consideration of the Association of Faith Communities' requests to increase parking availability on their request. And so I think that that's not listed here, and if we send it, then I would like to have that be considered as well to come back to us. And then I also want to suggest that we've heard a lot tonight, and I recognize this, that, we have immediate needs, and it is raining, it is cold. People don't have anywhere to go. And the warming center is one of the, the only program that actually provides a place for people to go immediately, urgently, when there's nowhere to go.
Mr. McHenry, I'm going to go ahead and ask you. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to leave at this point. If I've mentioned it multiple times at this point to not be able to. It's not your time to speak. So we're going to go ahead and ask you to leave at this point for interrupting council proceedings again. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
go ahead.
Someone's watch.
Okay. I'll just finish up on the warming center, and then I'll just reiterate so that they're clear.
So the city did lie, and people did die. And so that, Mayor Watkins said to give us that, the city lied and people died.
Okay, please, Councilmember Brown.
So just finishing up on the statement that I was trying to make about the warming center, I think that given the work that the warming center does, given the comments that Brent Adams made tonight, and in conversations I've had with him prior to this meeting, this idea of kind of being able to scale up a model that's working is really important for us to consider and to keep in our minds. So I'd like to include direction to staff to bring back consideration of funding for the warming center when you report back to us about alternative and expanded shelter space, which it sounds like is going to happen soon. So those are my requests. And I guess I'll just make one more comment so I can just try to wrap up, and I don't want to, keep us here coming back around to my comments that I keep thinking of. But so I do want to say, we've also heard, I mean, it's not just the people here who are here tonight. We have heard, we had 300 pages of correspondence, emails to the city council about this included in our post-packet production, and I stopped counting, but most of them asked us to take more time to consider the language and what we are going to pass. And it was not just the folks here tonight. There are many more people who are making that request, and it was a predominant message. So I think it's reasonable to do that. So I'll stop there and just add, so the first piece was in the second sentence there, send the city's amended camping ordinance and the county camping ordinance to the catch for thorough, deliberate, and expeditious review, and provide recommendations on city and county-wide response.
Okay.
So that's the first. And then request, adding consideration of the AFC request to increase available parking spaces subject to review by the PD. And yeah, so if you're not ready to accept those, then I'll just make those as a separate motion afterwards.
Just want to explain that the AFC request and part of why this is going to the catch. So there's a number of issues that have come up with regards to this ordinance. One of which is the number of vehicles that a religious institution can have on their lot, which is that. There's also the length of time that, for example, someone can live in the RV in their own in someone's private backyard. There are issues around whether or not tents can be up during the daytime. These are things that I've been hearing during the daytime when it's raining. So the idea behind having it go for review and getting these recommendations is to deal with all of these issues and allow for the catch to give us recommendations on all these issues. So, I mean, if the AFC needs to be explicit, that's fine, but my sense is that it's already included as one of the conditions for review, since that's something that people have reached out to us with concerns with.
Could I just, so I agree with you that there are many other issues that ought to be considered, but I just want to make sure that there is space for that and there's an understanding that that doesn't get lost in translation.
Great. Vice Mayor Cummings, did you have anything you wanted to add in?
Oh, I was just going to say that, my understanding is that as these standard operating procedures were being reviewed by the catch, so, and that we're going to get recommendations back from them. So that's kind of where I was at with, how we're going to approach those standard operating procedures. With regards to the safe sleeping areas, I'm more than happy with in the first motion that when we have staff work with the county on increasing winter and year-round shelter capacity, that they also include safe sleeping areas.
Councilmember Matthews.
Well, on this motion particularly, I suggested adding the safe sleeping areas to the first motion. What I meant by that was specifically the AFC managed safe sleeping program. The others are more undefined at this point. And I do have a question, maybe it's Andy for you. It's my understanding that the safe sleeping program in church has been on the books for 15 years or so with up to three. Is that correct? Safe parking. That's what I meant, safe parking. Yeah.
My understanding is they've had a couple different programs, one of which is people stay actually in the facilities. The other one is safe parking, and that's fairly new, is my understanding.
My point being, I believe, and maybe Martine, you can tell me that's on the books.
Yes, that provision has been in the existing ordinance for many years.
A long time.
Yes.
Not much used, I guess. I don't know much about this, but also not a problem from what I understand.
I think
generally.
Right. I think the key has been with the AFC program is that it's a managed program, and so I think that really is the principal thing that makes it successful. And also, there's variations, of course, as far as what each of the facilities can accommodate,
Right.
In terms of parking space, in terms of facilities that are available. So there's various factors that affect that. So,
I understand that. Just given on that particular program, and there is now apparently a program for a framework for administering that program, I could entertain expanding that up to 5 with the churches and the AFC's agreement, and see how it goes. I really would like to know more about the framework. Personally, that's something that's on the books. We could initiate that. I'm, as was suggested, not willing to have it go even more if the police chief agrees to it, because I think we could, with with a program that has been refined a bit in recent years, I think there's a capacity to grow it slightly and see how it goes. So I think that's something we could do now without having to wait a whole lot. So that was my one comment there. Should I speak on the rest of the motion at this point? Sure.
Could I just interject that the section of the municipal code that currently allows for vehicle parking on church parking lots was most recently amended in 2002, which kind of coincides with my vague recollection of when that was put in place.
Yeah. But there it is. So just other comments. The focus of the conversation tonight was about the revised camping ordinance, but I think it's and that is the most challenging part of this, probably, this whole field. But I think it's unfair to say that the city is not trying to make any solutions, is not doing anything, et cetera. As I think most of the people here know, we have invested in a variety of shelters. I see thumbs pointing down, but the city has made a good effort, has invested money. We have partners in numerous programs. I'm just thinking Downtown Streets Team, the Homeless Garden Program, any number of shelters. We allocate funding for health care, dental care, medical care that serve a large number of homeless individuals. So to say we're doing nothing, I think, is unfair. Not that there aren't more challenges. So I just want to say that publicly. I also acknowledge that people, I would say, not on both sides of the issue, but all over the place on this issue. A lot of people wanted more time. My own, and I don't know what's intended by the cash working on this with the holidays coming up and 2 readings and all that. I don't know what timeline we're looking at. My own preference, I think, would be to do a first reading, understanding that it's got a heck of a lot of work to do, but gives us something to go on, and then send that to the cash for comments. So I do feel the need in the community to try and take a serious effort at giving an alternative to no camping ordinance and start getting something in gear. So that's just where I fall down on where we send it. And I think it would be helpful to get an idea of, if it were to go to cash, what does the timeline look on that? Because I think putting it off into February is just going to satisfy nobody.
Yeah, I think I'll echo some of what I've heard. I am supportive of expanding the AFC to up to 5 vehicles. It seems it's a good way, it seems like, to accommodate people, try to meet them somewhat where they are and provide them a safe place to be at night. I also, I'm reflecting on sort of this, just the magnitude of the issue that I think we've been, talking about tonight. I think many of you have acknowledged this is, I ultimately, the state of California needs to help us figure this out. And I think we do have a very compassionate community here. And I do think that people are tired on all sides. And, So I think we need to continue to do the work we're doing. I'm encouraged, very encouraged. I want to thank the county for their involvement in speaking with us a lot last week, working really every day to try to identify potential additional shelter. And I look forward to hearing more from our staff on that. But I will compliment the county. I think several of us made phone calls the day after the meeting on whenever that was, the 12th, and many of us were in conversation daily to try to get more shelter available. So I think there is a shortage of shelter. I think we all know that. I think also what we're looking at in this community is we really don't have we have a systems breakdown on this problem. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind, that the success that people see in other communities, in other states, it really relies on a very systematic approach to how we do this. We have huge obstacles here. We don't have housing to move people into yet. And we have limited space to build that housing. We have limited resources to build that housing. So our system has some major gaps in it. One thing I think, even though the ordinance looks to be preventative, maybe in some preventative in many ways to many people in the audience, I think the strength behind this ordinance is around the concept of contact with people. We need to be looking at diversion. We need to be looking at prevention. We need to have that people contact. Unfortunately, the bulk of that work is going to probably fall on our police officers. I'm encouraged at this point. I'm encouraged that our officers are trained. We're trying to get connections with social services. We're trying to train officers in some of the systems-based approaches to what we should be doing to hopefully get people in the kind of situation that would potentially help them in a more meaningful way than having them be on the streets. So I think it's important that we do take action tonight. I am supportive of having the cash weigh in on some aspects of this, but I'm trying to acknowledge what the rest of the community is also asking the City Council to do, and that is to provide some relief from various folks who are unfortunately right now living out on our streets. And so there is no good answer tonight. But I do think we should move forward, and I would be supportive of trying to move this forward tonight in a first reading.
I have a few comments, and then I'll go back to Councilmember Glover. Did you want to say something, Martine?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect. I just got a text from Megan, who staffs the cash, and she was just letting me know that the cash has 2 meetings this year, and they've sort of booked and scheduled them already with a variety of agenda items, including community outreach. So it might be hard for them to obviously take this on this calendar year. Just wanted to note that.
I think that makes sense, because I do know that they've been working and meeting regularly, and I also want to show appreciation to the staff for presenting this in advance of this meeting to the cash as well. I share all the comments that have been made in terms of increasing the parking, as well as really advocating with our county partners for more support and how we can work together to alleviate a lot of these really larger challenges that we're experiencing. I also feel that it would be a lot of responsibility, and it would definitely, and I'm not surprised, I think, delay this process. So I appreciate the suggestion by Councilmember Matthews to be kind of in action, to make this. It is a hard decision, but to be in action and to have a first reading and welcome feedback but to continue to move and to be able to have some of these tools in place. And I really also want to acknowledge Councilmember Myers' response in that it's an opportunity for us to have contact to help people on an individual pathway out of hopefully homelessness, and was encouraged by the potential of having two specific officers that are going to be sort of, I'm assuming, part of this homeless unit, which has a different, I'm assuming, kind of lens. As I've read about other jurisdictions who have these types of units, that's really about blending how you balance these complex issues, but also ultimately try to support people. And I, of course, welcome any input if there's additional adds in regards to those specific officers' duties. So that being said, I think what the impetus of this was also having a tool in place to potentially mitigate any large encampments that have proven to be very difficult and have not obviously been what we want to have in our community because we want to do better, and also the public health considerations and challenges associated with that. So that's sort of my kind of just summary comments, and then we'll welcome more deliberation. Councilmember Glover.
Thank you. So there are just a couple of things, statements. You know, I always think back to Charlottesville whenever I hear the term "on all sides." It really bothers me. I've heard it with renters protections. Now we're hearing it with people experiencing homelessness. And it's important. Yes, there are different perspectives and different people coming from different angles and their interests. But one side is talking about survival, and the other side is talking about what some might consider nuisances. And so it's not to diminish public safety issues or feelings of safety or other kinds of issues. But if we're just going to move forward so that we're, quote, in action, moving towards the criminalization of people that are vulnerable just so that we can say we're moving forward, is dangerous in a lot of different ways. Not just problematic, it's dangerous. Also, the statement, there's no good options for tonight. So I disagree heavily with that statement. It matters how diligently we want to move on this topic. For example, imagine all of the hours that were spent in creating this ordinance. Just imagine how many staff hours went into that. And staff hours aren't cheap. So what if we had taken that money and repurposed it into something that was focused on engagement and participation as opposed to criminalization and penalties? Also, the idea of contact. So nothing against the police department. You're a great guy, Chief Mills. But I had a 62-year-old woman come to my community meeting last Wednesday to tell me about her experiences of being constantly pushed around by the police, getting citations left and right, and being forced to go into shelters where there are, people that are violent and all this other kind of stuff. So I don't think increasing contact with police officers, if they don't have the tools that they need or the access to the shelter, is going to be beneficial to anyone. As I believe Mr. Willis said, we're creating criminals by adding misdemeanors and other kinds of ticketing things. Also, we haven't talked much about city-owned facilities. We've only talked about the possibility of having the county step in and save the day, which I know we've said a lot of thanks to them, but after closing the VFW without giving us advance notice, and then now after we plead with them to potentially reopen the VFW, which will then bring us back to a net zero gain in units, I am a little bit less hesitant to be like, yay, county. And at the same time, we have a giant building directly across the street that is only used a few times in this winter season to be a possible housed location. We have the auditorium at the Loudon Nelson Community Center. I went there for my community meeting that I mentioned, and there was a community member who lives in that neighborhood that said that she would be absolutely okay with having people use the auditorium as a winter shelter, because right now their entire neighborhood is a winter shelter because they don't have anywhere to go or be inside. So there's people in Depot Park are gonna hate this, but there's the Freight Building. at Depot Park, which could totally be used. There's the Harvey West Clubhouse, which could be used, especially if we're looking for spaces for senior citizens or senior women or families with children. We have the resources available to us. We just don't seem to have the will in which to act on those services that we have. And so when I hear these arguments of we don't have the capacity, we're overburdened, we don't have the space, we got to work on the county, all of those are just really weak excuses for we don't want to do what we need to do to make sure that people are not sleeping out in the rain for the rest of winter. It might mean that we need to sacrifice some of our access to events. It might mean that we need to put pressure on the Kaiser Arena. We don't have site control over the Kaiser Arena, but what have we opened up communication with them to see if we can use it? I mean, it's really disappointing that we want to move so quickly through this, especially the term of expeditiously. You want the catch to review these things expeditiously. Don't you think we should be doing them cautiously and step by step to make sure that there's a million perspectives that are taken into consideration? Or, the catch is overburdened, right? So that motion's pretty much bunk if the catch can't do it in the next 2 meetings. So why not shift back to my original suggestion and instruct staff, maybe Megan, who's seemingly the one that's coordinating sheltery stuff, to have a conversation, or the attorney's office to have a conversation with the advocates, the ACLU, the Santa Cruz Homeless Union, people from the in-house population. It's not the catch. That's right. But it is a population of people that are ready to give us input on how we can make the ordinance work in a way that they feel is just, and or participate in the process so they have their voice feel heard. It's a constant cycle we have. I brought these issues forward in February for us to be able to establish safe parking zones, safe sleeping zones, and some form of transitional encampment. And when we say that this ordinance is to stop the popping up of large encampments because they've, quote, proven difficult. We have not done anything to adequately or intentionally work with the people that are trying to establish these camps to provide them with the services and support they need to be successful. So when you say we want to stop the large encampments from popping up, you mean you want to stop large encampments from popping up and actually working with them to make a solution instead of just criminalizing them and pushing them from one place to another. It's getting kind of ridiculous. Just like someone said, it's either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. And if you're not going to do it because you get to go home and sleep in your warm bed tonight with your family and your food and your heater and all this other kind of stuff, people are still going to be out there. And we've already lost 2 people this year that we know of based on lack of shelter. So take it how you take it.
Right, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the time for council, action. So, if there is an interest in modifying the motion or, a supplemental motion to try to get the council to move in a different direction to Councilmember Glover's comments, this would be the time. So right now we have a motion on the floor.
Was the friendly amendment accepted?
One.
Councilmember Brown, the 3.
I mean, really what I'm most interested in is ensuring that the parking availability for the AFC program is included and specifically addressed, however that's addressed, and also including consideration of funding for the warming center when we get a report back about shelter expansion and replacement.
I have also, if I could, a clarifying question. I have also a clarifying question in regards to the information and sort of what to potentially put onto the cache, and knowing that that won't likely to come back to them for a good period of time, and frankly is a lot of responsibility on a volunteer group that's working a lot on a lot of major issues. Given that information, is that still the direction of the motion maker? Knowing it will postpone it for several months.
I wouldn't. It would be good to get some sense of how long this would be postponed for, because I think part of it is that, when we were making decisions earlier last year around places where we were going to put safe parking or transitional encampments, there were a lot of people who came out, and there was a lack of community engagement in that entire process, which is what led to the catch being formed. And so that...
Speak up, please.
Into the microphone.
So that was the reason why this recommendation was coming forward, because my understanding too is this came as in response to when when the new camp was forming, there was a need, and because we saw some other camps forming, there was a need to put on this emergency ordinance. But now that that camp's not there, it doesn't seem like it's as much of an emergency to deal with at this point in time, which is why my understanding was that, we're getting all this input from people from the community who want us to take a step back. They haven't had a chance to look at it. We can give it to a community group who we've tasked with looking at these. I would even, be happy if we could have a subset of members from the catch work with a subcommittee from the city council over the next month to 2 months and bring back recommendations, or month to month and a half. I think that it would just give us time and more opportunity to kind of go through, because I know that if we were to sit here tonight and to wordsmith everything, every change that people would want to see, it would be another 2 hours that we would probably be here. And that's why, in my opinion, it would be good to send it on, or to not postpone it, but, to postpone it and work on it a little bit further.
Did you, I wanted to see.
I was just going to make a comment that, just given the discussion that's been had since the motion was made, and a sort of free-flowing discussion about a friendly amendment, I think it would be worthwhile to have the motion restated so that we can all agree what is on the floor. I was also going to suggest that the council consider putting a date certain for the return of the ordinance to provide the catch, a reasonable amount of time to review and comment, but not just continue it indefinitely. I really do think that this is a tool that is lacking right now, and is something that the council really should give serious consideration to, and hopefully take action on.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and restate the motion, and then we'll go ahead and...
Sure.
And oh, you have it up here? Okay.
Can I add I agree that I think it'd be helpful to define what expeditious means. And I think with respect to the cash, I know they already have a update that they've prepared for you for the 10th. But I think certainly if this is a priority, I know they've got items scheduled. They could possibly make that a part as well. So I think having a clear timeline of when you want it back will help us then develop the work and the agenda with the cash, recognizing that they've already done some work and they've already prepared, I think, some updates for you on the 10th. But then moving forward, they could certainly prioritize this if that was what the council wanted.
I had Councilmember Crone, and then Councilmember Myers, and then Councilmember Matthews.
My question was addressed. Thank you.
Councilmember Myers?
I guess I am, so December 10th is our last meeting, so we only have one more meeting before the break, and then we don't come back till mid-January. So that feels like a long way to wait to some extent. We also have holidays in between. So you mentioned the idea of some kind of council subcommittee. That might be a more expeditious way to, I can't speak anymore, to try to move forward to bring a revised version of the ordinance back potentially to council on December 10th. I do agree that I think this is an important tool that we need. I'll speak a little bit to my comments before. I too have spoken to people, a lot of the situations that people are in are pretty dire, and sometimes people don't want to be in the tent with the person that has the tent set up. So I try to keep that in mind, and I want to make sure that we acknowledge that there's a lot of different factors that go into the circumstances that people find themselves in. Especially with the most vulnerable people in our community, including women and youth. So again, this is a tool that provides our police to really acknowledge and make contact to see sort of try to figure out what someone's circumstance is as they're trying to figure out a place for the evening or even a place for the day. I do like the amendments that have been made so that it's clear if someone needs to be resting on a bench and sort of regrouping during the day. We've tried to accommodate some of that language, but I guess I would make a substitute motion to create a council subcommittee to work with the city attorney, city manager, and chief of police to come back with an alternative, revised language for the December 10th meeting.
Okay. I'll go ahead and second that motion. So now we'll go ahead and Mr. Kandati will have an opportunity to take a vote on the potential substitute motion. And then if not having enough support for the substitute motion, then we'll go ahead and return back to the original motion. Is that correct?
That's right. The vote is whether to accept the substitute motion.
Okay. With this, we can have discussion before that vote. Okay, Councilmember Matthews.
The question is whether or not to accept it and then vote on it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's
If
go
it's
ahead.
accepted, then you can vote on the motion.
Okay. Well, okay. We'll go ahead and take the vote on whether or not to accept the substitute motion.
But I have another question also.
Councilor
Is your
Matthews.
suggestion for a committee of council members, staff, and cash representatives, or just simply council and staff?
I think in looking at the timeline, I know we'll be sending the SOPs. I believe the second reading really wouldn't be happening until January, correct? Because if we brought language back December 10th, we actually don't reconvene until I think it's January 14th or something like that. It sounds like the cash has a couple of meetings planned. We could send the SOPs to them. So yeah, my idea was to keep it to council members.
And in my opinion, there are a whole lot of other people out there who want to comment on this other than cash. So I think the idea that we're just going to do it internally in the city and maybe send it to cash and we're done misses a huge amount of the comment that we've gotten. So perhaps there's a refined version of this, but we would still, I think, have to consider it a first reading. Because, my gosh, for the December 10th meeting, when do we get the staff report in for that?
Thursday.
Next Friday?
Wednesday.
Yeah. I mean, a week from today.
I'm sorry, yeah, which is tomorrow. Yeah, Wednesday.
Pretty fast work.
So yeah, maybe we're just up against the time. Yeah.
Stick with that. No.
If it is, I expressed my opinion was just to get something on the table to work on. It's out there. People now know what the starting point is. But I think if we take more time on it, then definitely it should go out for more conversation to the broader community.
You want to withdraw your? Do you want to withdraw?
Criminalizing homeless people further.
Okay, Elise.
I'll withdraw my motion.
She's going to go ahead and withdraw.
Please don't criminalize the people with schizophrenia.
Elise, we're going to go ahead and ask you. We've had an opportunity to hear from you. I'm going to go ahead and ask that you take a seat. If not, I'm going to go ahead and ask that you please leave at this time.
I hate going to jail. I'm going to sit down. I hate going to jail.
Okay, well then,
wrong.
if there's another outburst, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to go. Then go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify with respect to the SOPs, those, because they're adopted by resolution, there's some time there. Also because after the second reading, there's a 30-day period that goes into effect. There's more time there to have that reviewed and considered by council. So originally our thought was that if you had the first reading today, second reading on the 10th, the SOPs wouldn't come back to you until January, which would still be before the ordinance went into effect, so that there's some time there for review in January. So just so you know, with respect to that portion of it.
Right. So we had the motion withdrawn. Is that correct? Did you want to add something, Mr. Kandati? No? Okay. Okay, so the substitute motion has been withdrawn. Councilmember Glover.
Motion to call the question.
Okay, there's a motion to call the question. There's a second by Councilmember Crone. All those in favor?
What is the question?
The motion that was before us at this.
The original
presented
motion.
by him.
Can I see it on the? Yeah.
So I was going to ask for it too.
I don't even know if you accepted the.
Yeah, I still don't.
No, that hadn't been amended, and I was going to ask because of the fact that multiple council members have stated that they're interested in increasing the number from 3 to 5. Should we have that as a separate?
Let's just go ahead. We have a motion to call the question, so we need to take a vote on that motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. So that passes with Vice Mayor Cummings, Councilmember Crone, and Council. Did you vote no?
Sandy voted no.
I said.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I feel like there's something that we need to work out.
We don't even,
I know.
not even clear on what the question is. So.
Right, exactly. But there was a motion to call the question, so all those, so no.
Also, vote no.
Okay, so that passed with that fails with Councilmember Crone and Glover voting in support, and the remainder of the council voting against. Okay, so we'll go back to the discussion on the proposed motion and clarification. Councilmember Matthews.
In reference to the most recent question, I would be completely in favor of directing that we ask to have a revision to our existing safe parking ordinance amended to be increased up to 5. Up to 5 sites for safe parking on church parking lots through a managed safe parking program. That's on the books.
So are you having that added as
No, I think that's something that doesn't have to go through all sorts of other stuff. That can be just a clean action.
You know what, we're going to go ahead and ask that you please keep your voices down so I could hear my colleagues up here as we're trying to Okay, we'll go ahead and ask that you also keep your voices down so that we can, and we'll try to speak into the microphone more clearly so that we can hear each other. My understanding is that the motion, what you're asking is to add as a friendly amendment to the motion.
Not even a friendly amendment, a separate motion.
A new motion.
Yes.
This one's done.
Okay.
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 No, just when we get to it.
Oh, when we get to it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and reserve that for after we are able to finalize what we have before us now. Okay, so the motion before us at this time is to really show indication that we do intend to pass some sort of ordinance in this way, but we want to have it go through the potential cash first. Is that
and
correct?
community
And community first.
Oh, sorry,
and are you at this time not suggesting that we pass a first reading of it this evening, Vice Mayor Cummings?
No.
Okay. Okay.
And I can comment on that as well, because my understanding is if we pass a first reading tonight, then we're going to go get public comment, and then it's going to come back, and we're going to have to do it again.
Still a first reading.
Just keep coming back and forth until we get the proper amount of input. So I think that we would just be having this come up agenda after agenda, similar to last year. And I think that if we can get, sufficient feedback, then we can bring it back at a time when we have a clear direction where we're going.
It would be helpful if we got pretty clear direction on your timeline. I think that would be really helpful to have a deadline.
Okay. So Councilmember Myers and then Councilmember Brown.
I have a question regarding sort of how we, Vice Mayor, how we might collect that community. So are we thinking about having a kind of a hearing or community meetings, or how do we collect? I mean, I know we've gotten a lot of written correspondence, but I'm just curious and how that fits into the timeline in terms of. Do you have thoughts on that? I mean,
one thought that I had, and potentially we could have thinking about the catch, and the reason why I was bringing it to the catch is because that's a body that can vote on recommendations, and it's also a group that can hear comments from members of the community when they're taking that information into account when they're voting. And so that was why I wanted to send it to that body, because they actually have the power to vote on recommendations. So that was the reason for bringing it there. And because it's 11 people who represent different sectors of our community, they can bring those voices in and those recommendations in when they're voting on this.
I know the catch is I think it may be worth having another meeting outside the cache too for community input for sure. Only because the cache, is a advisory body, but I think also if we could somehow facilitate a couple of other community meetings. I think that might be useful as well. Sorry, I'll stop.
What I was going to suggest is certainly with respect to the cash, they could schedule a meeting. They've already got some scheduled in December. With respect to the other groups, I think setting up individual meetings with them would be the most expeditious way. So we could reach out and schedule meetings with council members and whatever the organization might be, and then get their input.
I had Councilmember Brown and then Councilmember Glover, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, I would just add, because the comment I was going to make was kind of in response to that question that you asked, Councilmember Myers. I think that the catch is, I mean, we established that committee to take a deeper dive into these issues and bring us recommendations. And so I think that is an appropriate place to have community input happen. If the staff feels that, some individual meetings could happen expeditiously without a whole lot of extra effort, I'm not opposed to that. But I do think that we appointed this committee for a reason, and they ought, and that's why I would like to have them weigh in, and use that as a space for additional community input. The public is welcome at those meetings. Council members can go to those meetings and listen to what the public has to say and what catch members have to say. So I'd just like to kind of concentrate that effort in the space that we've already created.
Councilmember Glover and then Councilmember Matthews.
Thanks. I was also reminded that at my last meeting last Wednesday, that there were representatives from the catch there that let us know that they're having specific community engagement meetings. Of the 2 catch meetings, the second is community engagement on safe sleeping and camping programs. They specifically allocate about an hour and a half for community input to come in and talk to the catch directly. And I believe they also have a safe sleeping and managed campground subcommittee that could look at it. Also, it was brought up as a suggestion that we could direct staff catch to prioritize this issue and then push one of their existing items off so it's a tighter timeline. And if the city manager is looking for a specific time, we could just say the first meeting in January. That'll give us 6 weeks, somewhere in there, 5-6 weeks for us to be able to talk with Cash, then look at it, review it, ideally get community input from maybe the ACLU, who has come out saying that we should not even enforce this until we have the shelter in place and stuff like that. So I would just say, and like I said before, I think we should just move with this. And if the city manager needs it, to say bring it back the second or the first meeting in January. But I think we should move forward and take this vote.
Councilmember Matthews, and then.
Well, I continue to think that sending it to cash alone is not enough. I mean, think of all the meetings that have been held out there recently on this topic. I know Drew and I went to a meeting in the Harvey West area hosted by Housing Matters. Packed with people. We've had meetings in the beach area, meetings downtown. I think a number of the service providers could give us some good perspective on this. So it is a big deal. A lot of people have a useful perspective on it. I would hope we'd have enough time to get that, and it's tough during the holiday season.
Okay. So are you suggesting a different path, or are you supporting the path?
Suggest, let me see what the top of that motion says there. I'm trying to read all of it now. Can we scroll a tiny bit, Bonnie? I can't read the top of it. Oh. Is it up? Oh, I don't see it there. Okay.
Should just move it.
I have a couple of suggestions which I mentioned just in conversation here on that language, if it were acceptable to say increasing winter and year-round shelter capacity, on-call beds. I would say manage safe parking areas. That would be, is that an acceptable change there? And relocation of the River Street camp prior to construction.
To manage safe sleeping areas after on-call beds.
It would say manage safe parking
That's
Instead
right,
of
managed.
on-call beds?
No, instead of safe sleeping areas.
Instead of safe sleeping areas?
Yeah.
I think that's why I understood.
They're two different things. Parking areas.
What?
That's like the AFC.
Yeah, but that takes away the safe sleeping areas, which was in there intentionally so that they would come back with safe sleeping areas to offer as alternative places where people could go in case they were in violation of the ordinance, because we need to provide them with a place to
Okay,
go.
well, we can see if Vice Mayor Cummings, who's the motion
His
maker,
motion,
wants
that
to
was not in
accept
the
this.
original one. I had suggested safe sleeping, but what I meant was managed self-parking.
Is that accepted in terms of the correction?
Safe parking?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
In removal of safe sleeping?
That's right.
The one thing I would say with the safe sleeping is that we went through that all last winter, and within the city, at least, there were no areas that we were able to determine would be adequate safe sleeping areas. That was the decision. We got down to the decision between Depot Park and I think it was the wetlands, and neither of those, the marsh, yeah, and neither of those were acceptable. And there was only two remaining areas within the city that were under consideration for safe sleeping, and neither of those were selected by the city council. So I don't think we should pursue that again at this time.
Okay, so you're accepting the friendly amendment. Are you, as the seconder of the motion, Councilmember Crone, accepting that as well? The modified language?
I thought Councilmember Glover just mentioned like 5 different places that were not the marsh or the Depot Park.
No, we had.
As far as safe, like.
If I may.
Sure.
So last winter, when the safe sleeping areas were brought to the city council, the staff was directed to go throughout the city and find city-owned parcels where we could have safe sleeping areas. And of all the parcels that they identified, we ended up narrowing it down as a group to 2. And there was a decision made to put it at Depot Park. That decision came back, and we decided we weren't going to put it there. We decided we weren't going to put it at Jesse Street March.
Neither of them were good ideas. But what about indoor places? What Councilmember Glover was just talking about? Is that different than a safe sleeping area?
Yeah, well, if you want to withdraw the motion, the seconding of the motion, that's possible. But the maker of the motion modified the language to encompass safe parking as opposed to safe sleeping. And if you're not supportive of that as the seconder of the motion, now would be the time to withdraw that. Your second.
Well, I'm asking him a question.
That is, can I reply? But that is implied on increasing winter and year-round shelter capacity.
Yeah.
That's winter shelter is indoor shelter.
Second.
Okay, go ahead.
And then I think if you're agreeable to take out the word temporary and just say, and relocation of the River Street camp prior to construction. And the reason I say that is we were told earlier in the day that there may be other locations that we are able to identify that can give equivalent or even more space, and we wouldn't necessarily have to go back to the North River Street. So I think saying just temporary relocation implies a conclusion that we didn't reach.
Okay, so instead of during construction, it would say prior to construction.
Relocation, not temporary, but just
Just the
take out word
relocation.
temporary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And
Yeah, and then take out temporary.
take out temporary.
Before relocation, you would remove temporary. Above there, yeah.
Third line, last word.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have additional
I have
comments? And then I'll
another
go to
question,
Councilmember Brown.
and it says to send the city's amended camping ordinance and the county camping ordinance. Is both of them.
The idea being that they will be able to provide us with recommendations on ours and also see how that fit within the county's ordinance, because the county also has one and we should try to be consistent.
And I do appreciate that says sending it to the cache and the community. And I think then, according to what the city managers told us, what we need is some idea of a timeline on this thing.
I'll go to Councilmember Brown, but I just want to say, I think hearing from our city attorney and city manager and chief of police this evening, that we want to get out of a position of not being able to be able to adequately respond and to have some sort of guiding document so they're not constantly in a position of trying to sort of get into the cycle of putting out fires, right? So I appreciate kind of the context in that regard. Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, well, I just want to make a comment about the move to eliminate temporary relocation of the River Street camp. I understand, I recognize the potential that that site would either not be available or not necessary, although I think we're going to need extra availability kind of indefinitely here. So I just wonder, because I don't want to foreclose the possibility of using that site again. It didn't sound like there was, from our water director earlier today, it didn't sound like there was a definite immediate need to use that space after the work has been done. And so I guess I don't want to foreclose that possibility.
Okay. Okay, so we could even add language prior to the construction and for potential reopening after completion of, or something like that.
In my mind, if I could, just saying simply relocation prior to construction says nothing about what will happen to that. When the construction's done, it could be. It remains one of the possibilities.
To the point,
sorry,
is that adequately covered, or could we potentially add that language for the interest of moving this item?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in moving it, but I really do feel that I would like to, as a council, make clear, if there are the votes for it, that that space will be continue to be in consideration after the work is completed.
Yeah, I think there's consensus from the council on that, and and that could be noted potentially in the minutes. Okay. All right, Councilmember Glover.
Yeah, I was going to say I would imagine the need to see it in writing, just based off of. I mean, I would like to see it in writing based off of my experience with this body in general, because we'll do it, it'll switch, and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, let's not put it there, let's put it over here, but not here's going to work. So I'd love to have it in there so it's guaranteed that it'll go back there after the transition. Councilmember Brown and stuff.
So does the maker of the motion want to accept the revised language to add that specificity that after construction is complete, that site could be reopened?
You could just say in parentheses, with possible reuse.
There you go, with possible reuse. Does that work? So you put possible reuse in parentheses after.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
And then I would just.
Vice Mayor Cummings.
I would just add language like for the prioritization of review and recommendations for a countywide response. That way, the language is there saying that if we can make this a priority for the catch, then maybe this item could then go to the next two meetings in place of some of the other items that they're going to be considering.
So priority for expeditious review does mean that it will take priority over some of the other content of the additional meetings. Okay, thank you for the clarification. And ideally, a return date as soon as possible to the council for action to take action on the ordinance. Councilmember Matthews.
So would you want to say, give direction for cash to prioritize this issue? It means bump your other projects if that's what we want.
Priority, it says for priority expeditious review.
No, it doesn't. Does it?
Cash and the community for priority.
Oh, you're up there. Okay,
review.
I was down on another one.
Well,
Excuse
now I'm
me.
adding it to this.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, I think it covers
Okay.
in that.
Okay.
Priority. I would put and between priority and expeditious.
Review. It seems, okay. And then the remaining elements of the friendly amendment have already been kind of spoken to, and the warming center suggestion could get wrapped into the original motion around how we're expanding conversation around potential additional shelter space.
Sorry?
So it seems that we're able to have incorporated all of the different elements into the
main
remaining of the motion. Yeah. Okay. So, Councilmember Matthews.
Sorry. It's okay. So are all those friendly amendments now part of the motion, or are they considered to be
I think they're inherent in the motion.
inherent? So you're dropping them? So I was just.
They've been incorporated into the motion. Because the first one is the exact same
The first
statement of the
bullet is
motion.
basically what you just.
Did you, Councilmember Brown?
The warming center funding is not in the main.
No, that's right. That's an amendment.
Oh, the funding
So if we delete
specifically.
it, I'm fine with it being in the main motion, however it gets captured for the record, but that, I don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
Would you direct staff to work with the county on that as part of the broader conversation around expanded shelter? Or was that specific to the city? Because that was the original element of the motion, which to work with the county on increasing winter and year-round shelter capacity, on-call beds, and temporary locations. So it was sort of a component of that.
Sure, but the issue that I'm talking about here is that I want the city, whether or not the county decides to make a contribution or there's a conversation to be had there, and which I'd welcome, I want the city to consider contribution to fund the warming centers program this winter to prevent hypothermia.
Okay. Mr. Kandati?
So I guess I just have a question. Is the maker of the motion accepting the proposed amendment as a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Okay. And then we'll have a second motion around the increasing of parking, or is that now incorporated?
I think we can.
It's incorporated. Okay. Okay.
I was just going to say that first bullet, I think, is what we were.
It's redundant.
It's redundant. So the first bullet should be deleted. And then.
And the second one, too.
And the second one as well.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Okay. So we can delete the first two bullets under the friendly amendment. No, we don't.
Not for the minutes, we got to keep.
A record.
For the minute. Oh, okay.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
For the motion. Okay.
Okay. Does any further conversation around this? No? Okay. Amen. Unless, is this feeling accurate? Does everybody? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Okay, Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about just a follow-up question. Earlier I asked about inclusion of the material from your oral report in the minutes. And so I think that one other question that I want to ask is if it is possible for you to provide within the overall county, because you broke down the city's mat, I'm not going to call it bed, mat spaces, but the county was an overall. Can we get a breakdown of the county as well?
Yeah, I have a chart.
It's in there.
No, I can get that to you.
You can.
So you have a chart that the county provided me.
That would be great.
But I can share
And
that
just
with
make
you.
that available in the record. Thank you.
Sure.
Even if it could be the 28th.
Okay. So that concludes the first item on our evening session. We're now moving on to the second item. Did you have additional comments before we conclude the first item?
We didn't vote on the safe parking.
No, I think that
was
can move
incorporated.
with the other thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
That was incorporated. Yeah. Okay. Is that right? So
we were
gonna-
just talking about scheduling again. The first meeting in January is the 14th, then it's the 28th. And so an agenda report has to get to people on the 7th.
Yeah. So the most.
What are we shooting for?
As soon as possible.
Well, I think we've been told that they want
More time.
the target. Am I right?
20. Did you get what you needed in terms of the timeline? And is it being as soon as possible? We said it as a priority, or do you want a specific date? Before
I think it's helpful to have a specific date because, again, as soon as possible can mean anything. So clearly, December is not doable. So if it's
a first reading by the first meeting in January?
January, maybe January would be better. First meeting might be tough. What about January? I think January.
January 28th.
Oh,
Second meeting in January. no later than
In
the second,
January.
no later than the
No
second
later
meeting
than
of
the second
January.
meeting. Does
And
anyone
we'll do an update, if
we
for
need to
some
have
reason
an
there's an issue, so
Okay.
no later than that, so we can bring it back sooner, but no later than that.
Okay, no later than the last meeting in January. Is there consensus from the council
acceptable?
on that? Okay, it doesn't seem that we need a motion. There's consensus that we'd like to have that no later than the last meeting in January and brought to us if we are required to take action prior to that time. Councilmember Glover.
Are we on the next topic yet?